And today we have a very fun stream. We'll be discussing apocalyptic prophecy, specifically from the Bible and modern technologies, specifically concerning an interview that Peter Thiel did with the Hoover Institute. A friend of mine sent this over to me and said, hey, this would be a great stream topic. And I dove into it, and it absolutely is. Now, not because I think Peter Thiel is any sort of truth teller. And in fact, that's what I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about before we even get into that interview. I have a bit I want to talk about concerning this whole idea that these tech billionaires are here to save the American people. Obviously, most of you are already aware that Peter Thiel, a prominent tech billionaire, founder of PayPal, he's a conservative libertarian Christian, and an open homosexual, in which actually there was a controversy because he sued Gawker on behalf of Hulk Hogan due to his vendetta against them for outing him as a homosexual. And so, not exactly living a pious Christian life. And he's had very interesting enterprises regarding some of his companies and their relationships, for example, with the intelligence agencies, the government, and big banks. So Palantir being one. I know Whitney Webb has spoke about this a lot, talking about some of these, the PayPal mafia, of which Elon Musk is a part. And I want to talk a little bit about. I'm sure if you guys are on X, you have seen the latest debate concerning H-1B visas, of which Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, one of the Indian Americans who is part of the Trump coalition and supposed to partner with Elon in regards to Doge and the Department of Government Efficiency, are in favor of H-1B visas because Americans, according to Elon Musk, are kind of retarded. And is this true or not? So we're going to cover a little bit about this whole thing, but obviously Elon Musk and Vivek are prominent faces concerning the Trump administration, or at least the Trump candidacy in his run for presidency. Was elected in 2024, November 2024, just a month ago. Well, a little over a month ago at this point. But the whole mandate, the whole ethos of the Trump campaign was to stop immigration. We have a open southern border. We have mass immigration. We have cartels flowing into the United States. And in response to this, we see Vivek and Elon Musk want to increase what they called high skill labor. And I got an interesting little video to demonstrate that Tesla, despite Elon Musk claiming it is the most American car company, is actually twice the amount of H-1B visas used by any other car manufacturer in the United States. And really, this whole debate is about these tech billionaires being able to make profits off lower wage workers who are willing to come to the United States, most specifically India. India and China are the top two recipients of these H-1B visas. And India, I think, is like 70% of the recipients of these H-1B visas. And I can't help but think part of it is due to the legacy of British colonialism, that many Indians speak English. And so their ability to integrate into the workforce is a little bit easier than maybe somebody who's not as fluent in English. But all this has to come with this question that I'm beginning with is, are these tech billionaires really out to help Americans? And so Peter Thiel, for example, and his company Palantir is one of these mass data collecting companies out of Silicon Valley. And Peter Thiel, we're going to talk a little bit about him today. You know, he came of prominence with becoming the CEO of PayPal. So Elon Musk, and I have a whole video today. So I'm very critical of Elon Musk. I do give him credence when he does good things. For example, expanding the Overton window with X. However, we've also seen him get quite angry, and it appeared to be actually ban some people from X over this past weekend with the fallout concerning the H-1B visa conversation. But Elon Musk founded a company called X.com back in the day. This is in the 90s, and it was supposed to be a digital bank, essentially, very similar to PayPal, where you can send and receive money on the computer. And his technology was kind of antiquated, and so it was eventually incorporated and bought by what would become PayPal. And Elon Musk was eventually deposed as the CEO of PayPal, and inserted was Peter Thiel. And Elon Musk, in one of his severance lawsuits, or I forget exactly what the term you would use for the documentation when he was kind of outed as the CEO, he retained many of his shares. This is how he made like $100 million, $180 million, I think, something around there, when PayPal was eventually sold. But he demanded that he be considered one of the founders of PayPal, when really, in reality, he had no founding partnership or endeavor concerning PayPal. And this is also true with Tesla. If you guys are familiar, I did a whole stream called Elon Musk is Not Your Friend, where I talked about this lie of him being this sort of self-made millionaire, Iron Man figure, right? Where he is a pioneer in science. He's the smartest man in the world. I'm not really buying it. Not really buying it. And one of the things that's so interesting when you dive into his story is him being self-made and not coming from a family of money, which isn't the case. Of course, his father owned an emerald mine in Africa, and he grew up in opulence. He was very wealthy growing up. And in fact, his college years was funded mostly by his family, and many of his early startups, along with his brother, were founded by his father. Now, his father's an interesting character because he's also impregnated his stepdaughter twice with two children. And apparently there's an estranged relationship between Elon and his father. Yeah, his father's a technocrat for sure. And his mother's father, so his grandfather, also is an outright globalist as well. And so I've been very outspoken concerning Elon Musk as some sort of savior of the right. And unfortunately, this rhetoric has been very pervasive. And many people don't look at the long-term picture, right? So we can say him helping Trump get elected may, hopefully, God willing, helps the American people and sort of the preservation of whatever's left of American heritage here in this country. But I don't see him as a genius figure, and his story is fraught with really a lot of narcissism and um, just an overall disposition that it's about himself. And so just like when he acquired Tesla, the men who actually founded Tesla and the Tesla Roadster were outed by Elon Musk because he invested, I forget how many thousands or millions of dollars into Tesla. And then they did an interview in which they never mentioned Elon Musk because he had nothing to do with any of the inventions. He had nothing to do with the start of Tesla. And so he basically demanded that they go back to the editors. I don't know if it was with the New York Times or the Washington Post. It's been a while since I did that video. You can find it. It's called Elon Musk is Not Your Friend. And essentially, he ousted one of the founders and inventors of Tesla. And if you guys remember a few years ago, he shot one of the Tesla Roadsters into orbit, or supposedly into orbit. Well, that was the one that the man who he not only did not give him severance, but then filed a lawsuit against him, the man who was actually the founder of Tesla, send it into space just as a real fu to him. And of course, recently he just told Americans and anybody in the conservative Republican Party that doesn't want mass immigration legally through these HB1 visas, which is really just a way to undermine American pay because they can hire foreign workers for cheaper labor and then sort of bypass the American labor market, that it's kind of the same rigmarole. And so Musk is openly a transhumanist. In today's conversation, see, the reason why we're going to be looking at this conversation with Peter Thiel at the Hoover Institute is because he's portraying himself as like this sort of tech giant, billionaire, venture capitalist who's Christian, and that he's the only one taking seriously the book of Revelation and the idea that an antichrist is going to emerge and that potentially these modern technologies, specifically AI, could lead to an apocalyptic situation. And some of the stuff that Peter Thiel is going to say in this combo is actually something that we would agree with. But again, the irony is that he has companies that are literally part of the global surveillance system, like Palantir. And if you remember, I did a stream on modern day vampires. He also had a company called Ambrosia, in which wealthy people, for the price of $8,000, could get the blood, the plasma of young people between the ages of, I think it was like 16 and 26 or something. If they volunteered to give their blood, then wealthy old people could inject the blood into them to rejuvenate the tissue. And I was looking at a few articles. I believe it's now no longer in business, but some of the medical community has said, oh, this is pseudoscience. Well, I actually don't agree. I think that this is something of real significance in that when we look at these ancient rituals of people drinking blood, harvesting plasma, adreno, you know what I'm talking about. I think this stuff is real, and I think there are actual benefits to people ingesting younger blood, and this is why it's been a historical practice we can find in very savage, barbaric societies. So anyways, Peter Thiel doesn't have his own problems, but he's going to present himself in this conversation as like one of the few sort of reasonable tech billionaires that is keeping in mind a sort of Christian paradigm and how really the Bible is the only one that's really making sense of the current environment of chaos that we find ourselves in. So I find this very interesting, and I relate it to Elon Musk because people see him as a sort of salvific figure. But if you remember a couple Halloweens ago when he went to the Halloween party of Heidi Klum with his mother, of which I just want to show you guys some of this stuff. He dressed in a very expensive leather armor titled Satan's Champion. I find that very interesting. And this is one of the reasons why I've argued that Elon Musk is in a way the ultimate gaslighter. Here's his Baphomet like. Now it uses a ram head instead of a goat head, so you can see the difference in the horns, but the same upside down cross. The leather armor was titled the Devil's Champion. And he went there with his mother, who his mother is quite an interesting figure as well. She refers to herself as a sort of witch, and I was looking online, and I didn't find any evidence of her actually practicing magic per se, but I did find um, very just kind of interesting stuff. So here is like this is one fashion blog or something. Again, sort of praising May Musk. This is the mother of Elon Musk. Um, and so the enigmatic May Musk witch. So this is a title that she goes by quite a bit as a witch. What does it mean? And apparently for her, it just symbolizes that she is a woman of power. So the term May Musk witch is a fascinating moniker that has sparked intrigue and speculation. While it is not associated with any literal practice of witchcraft, it symbolizes May Musk's ability to transcend societal norms and expectations. Her life and career are characterized by a sense of magic and wonder, much like the mythical witches of folklore. This metaphorical association highlights her unique charm, wisdom, and transformative impact she has had on those around her. And then it talks a little bit about her contemporary discourse. Witchcraft is often seen as a symbol of empowerment, representing a connection to nature, intuition, and personal strength. Now, I say all this because very interesting Halloween costume. And so it was like, what, $7,500 to go to Heidi Klum's Halloween party. Now, do I think Elon Musk is the Antichrist? Of course not. We know, and we're going to be doing the next stream is actually going to be on, I'm going to be promoting this a little bit more today on this Romanian text, Elders on the End Times. And we've been discussing quite a bit some of the eschatological prophecies and insights we've gotten from saints and elders in the Orthodox Church. But we know that the Antichrist is going to be born from the tribe of Dan. He will be a Jewish man. And he will rule a one world empire from Jerusalem. Do I think Elon Musk is that figure? Of course not. And this is why I see people on Twitter like, what is it, Donnie Darkened, who thinks Donald Trump is the Antichrist. Come on, guys. Like, let's use a little bit more theological rigor here to come up with some of these theories. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the Antichrist. We're going to be talking about that in today's stream. But I find it very interesting that Elon Musk would present himself as the ultimate devil's champion and spend almost $8,000 to where I guess if you're a billionaire, that's not that much money. But explicit satanic symbolism. And if I don't have a photo here, but on the back plate here of this armor is a ginormous upside down cross. And this was right around the time that he was purchasing X. And this was his profile for a very long time until well, I'm not sure exactly when he changed his profile, but once Donald Trump got shot this past summer, Elon Musk jumped on the Trump bandwagon, and then we see him saying that things like he is sort of a cultural Christian. I mean, the same thing we've seen Richard Dawkins say. And I've highlighted in my stream that Elon Musk is not a figure that can be trusted. He's the ultimate gaslighter. He's on the both sides of every single issue. So at the same time that he warns about the devastating impact and possibilities of advanced artificial intelligence, especially if it gains a sort of anti-human sentiment based on the goals that are programmed in it, excuse me. He said the only way then to defeat the AI god that's going to be looming over us and creating a human slave race is to fuse with it, which is why he has the company Neuralink, which is also doing human test trials and presented as a salvific technology, right? It's allowing paraplegic people to communicate via the neural implants. And we did a whole stream on the history of neural implants as well. But by using these neural implants, people that are wheelchair bound can speak, they can see, they can, they get new abilities. We can see this sort of reminiscent of kind of the healing miracles of Christ. Now, if my mother was paraplegic and she could have some type of technology which would allow me to communicate with her, would I do that? I think that'd be a difficult question. And I don't know how exactly I would come down on that, especially given the emotional circumstances based on that. But Elon Musk, I mean, X.com, for example, when it was first created, I'm not talking about Twitter. I'm not talking about his acquisition of Twitter. I'm talking about X.com before in the 90s. And then after acquiring Twitter and then rebranding it X.com, the failed initial startup that he had, he says he wants to make it into basically the alternative to WeChat. Now, if you guys aren't familiar, WeChat is an app in China, which is basically a do everything app. It's your social media, it's your bank, it's your social credit score, it's the way in which you interact with the government itself. If they want to contact you, all of this is integrated into WeChat. And this is what Elon Musk says he wants to do with X.com, which gives you a little bit of insight into many of his companies. Now, I'm very skeptical of the advancement towards Mars. So SpaceX, I'm not really thrilled about. I know Donald Trump has spoken regularly about Rocket Man, talking about Elon Musk and how he marveled at some of these rockets he's created. And certainly the ability of these rockets to be reused and land, very interesting, very cool. But are we going to Mars? I'm very skeptical. I mean, I'm skeptical of the moon landing. We've talked about that. So his companies, we can see that even though he criticizes the sort of globalist radical left, his own companies and his own envision of the future is still globalist. Starlink is about providing internet access, but I've seen some speculation, and we've done this in some of our private premium meeting groups, is that Starlink, who knows what's going to happen to the internet? And we already see this sort of new H1N1 threat. It could be COVID 2.0 coming. Certainly seems to be that way. But I've speculated myself, is Elon Musk setting himself up? And of course, during COVID, he was the only one that had access. You still had government clearance to launch all these satellites into space. But is this going to be the internet 2.0, where you have to have your social credit score, where you have to have some type of X account, where you have to, be identified, you'll no longer be anonymous, all this type of stuff. He's an explicit transhumanism. When we're talking about apocalypse now, and when we're talking about listening to Peter Thiel today discuss modern technology and ancient prophecies, it's hard not to notice that Elon Musk is on the forefront of many of these technologies, which is leading us to what I believe to be the Antichrist kingdom. And so I've talked explicitly about how I believe transhumanism is how the Antichrist is going to be perceived as divine. And so it's a total inversion of Christ. And I see this technologically mediated, interconnected, cybernetic skeleton of Satan around the world as a sort of the inverted incarnation of Christ. That Satan doesn't have omniscience. Satan can't be everywhere at once. I do believe in a literal evil one. We're Orthodox Christians. But through the technology, through advanced artificial intelligence, through the Internet of Things, and being connected to your phone, your refrigerator, your bank account, your garage door, your Ring doorbell, all this stuff can be accessed. And in a way, the technology is a sort of artificial noetic realm. And I spoke with Father Deacon Dr. Ananias about this. I don't know if it was privately or in a stream, I forget. But we talked a little bit, and I do agree that I see the noetic realm, which is just a term for anybody who's unfamiliar with, is our sort of mental capacities. As Orthodox Christians, we don't believe in a sort of abstract concept of a mind that's divorced from the body, and that we believe in a highly integrated tripartite understanding of anthropology. So we have a soul, a body, and a nous. And the integration of these things allows us to participate in sort of the noetic realm, which is outside space and time. And this is what the imagination is. This is what the mental faculties are. This is why these uncreated energies of God, love, logic, reason, compassion, long suffering, you can't touch any of these things. These are because these are the uncreated energies of God that are outside space and time. And that technology, we've talked about before, that mechanical technology was about replacing the physical body of physical labor. But these digital technologies about replacing the brain, the mind, the noetic faculties of man, in which you become dependent upon the technology. And in fact, you sort of outsource your mental capacity to the technology. And I pointed to the atrophy through technology. For example, map reading, the ability to navigate space, drive certain places. Young people can't read maps. And in fact, they have to use like Google or Apple Maps. And even after they use it multiple times, they still don't pick up on how to get somewhere. They become dependent upon the technology itself. And this is absolutely pernicious. And I'm not saying that technology is evil in and of itself. It can't be. It doesn't have a will. But we can see how this progressive momentum of technology is entirely disenfranchising humanity. And Elon Musk's Neuralink, his the Tesla cars, for example. I mean, we know that these electric cars actually take up more resources than they save regarding global climate change. And Elon Musk is one of these big promoters of global climate change, despite I'm very skeptical of that. Donald Trump's been skeptical of that. And I would highlight the point that why would all these central banks, who are very much concerned with return on their loans and their money, why would they fund all these hotels and resorts, or Martha Vineyards, Barack Obama buying oceanfront property that's supposed to be underwater? In fact, Manhattan was supposed to already be underwater, but it's not. And so we see that this global climate change is really a narrative for the centralization of power. And one of the ways in which they centralize power is to move towards alternative energy sources, of which these tech oligarchs and billionaires are already monopolizing by buying up corporations and then forcing governments and forcing the world to adopt the same thing. We look at China, and they're not so interested in electric vehicles. They use them when they're appropriate. They actually have some very good vehicle manufacturers in China, from what I recently was reading about, but and some of which that are competing with Tesla. But they're not interested in all this stuff. They burn more coal than any other country in the world. And so you can't help but notice that Elon Musk and many of these tech billionaires, despite whether they support Donald Trump or they have rhetoric about America first, they ultimately are globalists. They ultimately are moving us towards this one world government agenda, of which they have monopolized important dimensions that would be required within those societies. For example, transportation. So when we look at his Boring Company, well, it's not about getting from LA to San Francisco in a short amount of time. It's about creating for him an avenue in which only Tesla cars would work, and then you'd have to get on these hyperloop trains that never came to fruition. And it's just another method for him to control transportation itself. He can control the integration of mental faculties with technology. He's able to control the internet through access to Starlink, right? These are important bridges that, if we're actually moving towards this world, which seems to be inevitable, he has quite a monopolistic power on. So when this whole thing comes up regarding Antichrist and technology, I believe that what we're seeing through transhumanism is, and this is what I write about academically, is the inversion of theosis within Christianity. And this is ultimately demonic. And anybody, in my estimation, who promotes transhumanism or believes in transhumanism is whether explicitly or implicitly promoting a demonic agenda. And some of them are open about it, some of them less so. Maybe some of them think that this is for the betterment of humanity, but all of it is based in this worldview in which humans are somehow the arbiters of the good, the true, and the beautiful, and not that these things are objective, transcendent realities that in which we connect back to the Creator Himself. So I say all this because I don't want to rehash all these streams I've done on technology and the kingdom to come. You know, for example, we talked about theurgy and Hermeticism. If you've read the Hermetic corpus, Hermes Trismegistus is telling Asclepius about how to ensoul statues with demons. And I believe that this could absolutely be done with technology. So when we're talking about this sort of race for AI supremacy, which is happening right now between Russia and China, and then all these tech companies in the West, specifically in Silicon Valley, the goal is to get this sort of the ultimate AI system. And who knows how advanced some of these things are, but I don't believe it can ever become sentient because it doesn't have a soul. They can't actually be a full person, which if the devil and sin and the spiritual warfare is actually about destroying you and trying to get you to commit sin so that you destroy the image of God in yourself and you sort of lose the divine person of you, it makes sense that the AI wouldn't actually have personhood in our understanding of ontology and the three persons of the Trinity. But in fact, the blending and the uniting with it is the total annihilation of your personhood. And I think this really is tied to the mark of the beast. Now, is the mark of the beast just going to be some type of card in your hand or your forehead so you can access the market? Maybe that's the first step. But ultimately, the way that I look at this mark of the beast, the way that I look at this end time kingdom that's coming, and when I understand the Antichrist, I see the Antichrist as the ultimate transhuman. This is why people will bow down and worship him, because he'll be able to know what's going on in Beijing, what's going on in Rio de Janeiro, what's happening in your bank account, or what you just posted on social media. He'll have total access to the Internet of Things. And just like Hermes Trismegistus teaching Asclepius how to ensoul demons into statues, which I do believe is a real thing, I believe that Satan himself or demons can actually inhabit the technology. And that's why technology is really the sort of artificial noetic realm that we're all participating in right now. Now, does that mean technology is evil? No, it is not. I always get people that say, well, then we can't use AI. We got to get off. And maybe that's good for some people, but technology doesn't have a will. Angels, demons, and humans have a will that allows them to be evil. But I do see technology being the conduit and the catalyst for a demonic takeover and for the way in which the Antichrist will emerge and why people will submit in a very convenient fashion to a false Christ and worshiping him as God. So anyways, with all this being said, I want to highlight that, Elon Musk has had a unfortunate history also concerning labor in some of his companies. So he's been sued and it's been proven that he's had very deleterious working conditions for certain places that he has owned. He's forced some workers to sleep over at the factories or some of the offices because he wouldn't let them leave without threat of firing them or some type of financial ramification, and that he's had incredible sort of work demands on many of the people that work for him. Yet he is presented as sort of this ultimate American entrepreneur. And if you've been following this H-1B conversation, you've seen that people like Patrick Bet-David, who has some opinions I agree with, but he himself became a multi-millionaire through a pyramid scheme. And he was actually today, one of the community notes on X highlighted that. And apparently he is trying to get his Wikipedia page changed or taken down because it explicitly highlights how Patrick Bet-David became a millionaire by selling sort of life insurance, but really this was a pyramid scheme trying to get people in, and he was very successful in doing so. And he's been telling people, well, the problem is the reason why we want H-1B visas, of which he himself has an H-1B visa for his YouTube channel Valuetainment for $41,000. So we're supposed to be told that these high-skilled workers, they're making $41,000 to work for Valuetainment, and you have to give them an immigrant visa to come here to do that? What? No, it's because for whatever the work demands that Patrick Bet-David, and I'm getting ready to show you all the H-1Bs that Tesla and some of Musk's companies have used. It's about undermining a living wage for American workers. And this has nothing to do with promoting America first. This has to do with the subversion of the American populace and the American worker. And it highlights that these tech billionaires, whether it be Peter Thiel, who's presenting himself as a sort of reformed Christian trying to bring biblical wisdom into the conversations of apocalyptic technology, or Elon Musk presenting himself as the ultimate American firster and defending free speech while also then banning people from X who are critical of his H-1B visa or are ratioing him. There's been a few accounts that ratioed him on some of his tweets, and lo and behold, some of those accounts are no longer exist. I'm not sure what exactly is going on. And I've highlighted the one platform that I'm most shadow banned on is X. And I've tried to contact X multiple times. I don't get any response in regards to what can I do? How can I get my account restored so that people can even search my name? They can't even find me on these platforms. And so concerning this, I want to first show you guys, like, look at, this is a little video that I found very interesting. This is the amount of H-1B employees Tesla has, and it's absolutely staggering. As you can see, I mean, it's over double or close to double. Yeah, it is over double. Tesla H-1B workers compared to the other manufacturers. Now look at this. This is just all of his H-1Bs. Now look at the pay. 80,000, 95,000. Is this now we're told this is high-skilled labor, guys. We're told that America would not be able to function, that America could not have jobs, America would not be successful without all these workers. How is this the high-skilled workforce that we have to be importing in? It doesn't make much sense. Look, I mean, when I think of a high-skilled worker that's working at Tesla, I would assume they're making $250,000 plus, maybe $500,000. These are people that have unique skills that you can't get anywhere else. No, this is about $80,000, $100,000, $165,000, $120,000. I mean, the list just goes on. Data engineer. The reason why he's so, and of course he said anybody in the conservative movement who thinks that, essentially, I'm paraphrasing here, anybody who thinks that American jobs should only be for Americans and they don't want to compete in the marketplace of meritocracy, they need to go F their own face. That's what he said. And he called white people, specifically white Americans, like retards, essentially. And you can see that this just goes on and on and on of all these people that he hires. And you can only imagine that these wages, if American workers had these, I'm sure they do have these skills, but if they worked, they would probably demand a higher wage for the unique skill set that they have. But because, yeah, subtards unite. Yeah, absolutely, More. Musk is a decoy from the elite. It's absolutely true, and it's becoming more and more obvious. And same with Vivek Ramaswamy. His whole claim, and we're going to be looking at it here in a second, but look how Vivek Ramaswamy became a millionaire. Now, he's highly educated, again, comes from a wealthy family. This whole myth that these people are self-made is just ridiculous. They all come from very wealthy families. And so Vivek Ramaswamy acquires an Alzheimer's drug called Axovant for $5 million in 2014. The drug had already failed phase 2 trials in 2010. Vivek's own mother, Geetha Ramaswamy, conducts a new phase 2 trial in 2015, which conveniently is successful. Oh my gosh. And there's all these videos of Vivek going on MSNBC, all these different news stations talking about how he has the cure to Alzheimer's. They have a miracle drug, and he gets all this investment, $350 million IPO in 2015, which is where Vivek cashes out. The stock plummets by 75% by September 2017 after phase 3 trial failure. And after more trial failures, 99% loss in value and company name changes. This is how Vivek Ramaswamy became a multimillionaire. And that's in 2017. Of course, he was a super pro get your jab in 2020. And then in 2021, all of a sudden, he's a sort of freedom fighter, wearing a cowboy hat and American sports jacket that's, colored like the American flag. And now he's claiming, and I'm sure some of you guys saw this, that, Americans are too focused. I mean, he used dumb analogies like Saved by the Bell or Boy Meets World. Like, too many people in America, Americans have a culture problem. And certainly there is a culture problem, no doubt about that. And that should be discussed and brought up. But he says, we have a high skill labor problem and labor shortage in the United States. And the reasons why Indians like Vivek are so successful is because they value Screech over Zach when it comes to Saved by the Bell. So the good looking, sociable athlete. And the irony is, I believe in Saved by the Bell, when they do the SAT, it's Zach that scores the highest. In fact, I think it's like 200 points higher than Screech. But Vivek says that if we want to return back to American dominance and American brilliance, we need to venerate the nerds. You see, American culture is too focused on the exceptional physical and social figures of the world, athletes, entertainers, and rightfully so. Sports ball, Hollywood, these things are here to mesmerize the American population, and it's certainly not a benefit towards people. And we can see how that propaganda has been used to perpetuate social degeneracy in our culture. That's a fact. But also, do we want to be run by a sort of a nerdy platonic republic where we have these nerdy oligarchs and they're in control of everything? And it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And people like James Lindsay, who has to be one of the dumbest people on the internet. I'm sorry, Rachel Wilson. Shout out to Rachel Wilson. I see her in the chat. We did a whole stream talking about James Lindsay. I mean, he's an absolute doofus. And his latest thing is talking about the woke right. And the woke right, I get you, I shit you not, that you can go to his X page and you can see this, are the people that believe a nation is a people and a place, and that this is a communist leftist subversion psyop to convince Americans that America is really about a group of people and the place of their origin. What? That's a psyop? And if you want to preserve America, and if you want Americans to have jobs, well, then you're actually woke right DEI. You promote DEI. What? Promote DEI? The whole thing is that we just focus on the American workforce and we hire people born in America, whether they're African American or whether they're white. Doesn't matter. If they're born in America, they should have a priority over H-1B visas so that they can undercut American workers. So this whole thing is very fascinating, and we can see how the globalization, I believe, is part of, obviously, Agenda 21. You guys are familiar with that, the flooding of first world nations with third world migrants. But this is just happening through a legal basis of these H-1B visas so that they can undercut the opportunities of people born in this country. And that's true in other places. The irony, and this is a total side note, but I am so tired of Michaela Peterson. She has to be one of the dumbest people, and I have no idea why she still has a platform. She is so dumb. Her dad is just diving into a deeper and deeper hole with all his pro-Israel stuff. Anyways, I don't want to make this about Peterson. I could ramble on about Jordan Peterson, my frustrations with him, especially of late. But Michaela Peterson is saying that, oh, well, why would, joining the James Lindsays of the world, talking about, well, why don't Americans want really high successful people to come to America? Because that's what makes America. Dude, you just got here. The Petersons, Michaela and Jordan, fled Canada and came to the United States so that they can make more money. And we are supposed to listen to them to tell us that we need to bring in more and more people because Americans are too dumb and they're subtards, they're retards. and therefore we can't actually have high-skilled labor, and we shouldn't employ domestic labor, but we should import third world people because that's what makes us great. What are you talking about? Why did you flee Canada? And what policies made Canada unbearable? And why are you coming to America then and trying to use your guys' platforms to promote the same damn thing? You can see that spiritually, all this stuff is connected, because if you are abiding by a Christian ethos, clearly loving your neighbor as yourself means that there's a national coherency and that we have to come together as a people. And just like James Lindsay's dumb classical liberalism, like the dude's never even read Edmund Burke. I'm not even a huge Edmund Burke fan myself, but Edmund Burke, if you don't know, is the father of what's called conservatism within the classical liberal paradigm. And he was critical of the French Revolution, describing that as a sort of the anti-conservative movement, the progressive movement. And he founded what we consider like liberal conservatism, which was all about the preservation of your ancestors' cultures and customs, and a sort of secular valorization of those customs to maintain in your society, conserving your ancestors' traditions and practices. That's what conservatism is. And James Lindsay, the classical liberal, now labels that as a communist psyop, and somehow you're part of the woke right. You're part of the DEI radical leftist movement, and you're probably a Nazi, according to him. It's all so irritating. Anyways, let me take a quick break. I just saw that David James Flood gifted 10 COTEL Crew memberships. Thank you so much, David James Flood. God bless you, brother. Thank you very, very much for that. Really appreciate that. And in fact, I think that's a perfect time that I'm going to say I'm going to start posting some of my members' exclusive videos. Not all of them. If you want all of them, please go over to my website, become a website member. I'll promote that in just a second before we get into the full video. But I'm going to start posting some of those members only videos to the YouTube page only for members. So if you have a membership, if David James Flood just generously gifted you a COTEL Crew membership, I'm going to start posting some of those videos, and they'll be available on YouTube here. So thank you so much, David. God bless you, brother. Really appreciate that support. And my sister, Rachel Wilson, shout out to the Wilsons. God bless Andrew and Rachel and the girls. Hi, girls. Hope you are doing well. Hope you guys had a blessed Merry Christmas. She said, if I wanted to hire tech workers to help me insult demons and robots, I would hire Hindus from a poor country. Exactly. It's all starting to make sense, isn't it? Just saying, Happy New Year, COTEL Crew. Well, thank you so much, Rachel. Happy New Year to you as well. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And you can't get around like all the videos that people are describing. You know, I found a graph yesterday on open defecation. So this is just a global research. And this was actually presented in a TED Talk by an Indian woman dressed in traditional Indian garb. Okay. So this is not some racist bent. And she was lamenting the fact that places in which people defecate in the open, India is over 50%. It was like 58% of all open defecation in the world occurs in the country of India. I think that all these high-skilled laborers from India should maybe start to clean up their own culture a little bit. I think that might be beneficial. Let me check and see if anybody's sent in a super chat on Dono Chat or on Streamlabs. So guys, again, support my work. I got a few more things I want to show you before we get into today's stream, but support my work. Please send in any questions or comments. I would greatly, greatly appreciate that on YouTube, or if you could use Dono Chat or Streamlabs, they take a little bit less, but if you prefer to use YouTube, feel free to use YouTube. And if you're feeling generous, please give some COTEL Crew memberships. I'd really appreciate that. So anyways, back to what I wanted to show you guys. So this whole thing with Elon Musk and these H-1B visas, we can see that this conversation is really about people that own companies like Patrick Bet-David, like Vivek Ramaswamy, like Elon Musk, in which they can undermine the American wage and get foreign workers to work longer hours, right? This was a whole thing that Patrick Bet-David was mocking Americans because they don't want to work 80-hour work weeks. Well, why the hell should you have to work an 80-hour work week to get a living wage? That is not America first. That is basically you having indentured servants for, measly salaries so that they're forced to work 80 hours just so they can cover their bills. That is not freedom. That is not America first. That is not everything these people profess it is. And so I wanted to show you a little bit of something funny. This was Tim Dillon reacting to this diatribe that Vivek put out. And maybe I should pull that up. Let me know if you guys want to, if you haven't seen and you want me to pull up the full Vivek tweet, let me know. I'll pull that up. But this is a hilarious response by Tim Dillon. So I wanted to show you guys this.
More movies like Whiplash, fewer reruns of Friends, more math tutoring, fewer sleepovers, more weekend science competitions, fewer Saturday morning cartoons, more books, less TV, more creating, less chilling. How about more white people, less Indians? How about that? How about more white people, less Indians? Indians didn't come to this country. No offense. But if we're going to critique the country, how about more people that actually came to the country and fought in those wars? Was there a lot of Indians that fought in the Civil War? I'm confused. I just don't know. It sounds like a racist point, but it's actually not. It's been made by people like Tucker Carlson and Ann Coulter. And if they're racist, then I'm racist. No one's racist no more. But it's my point. I understand what he's saying. I wasn't a fan of Friends. I like Frasier. I understand we need more math competitions and shit like that. But this is the type of shit that is going to movement from the inside. He's basically going out there and saying, by the way, we need to import people because no one in this country is up to the task. So we need generations of people. What is the sleep? What a weird move. No sleepover, less sleepover. What about smart kids having a sleepover? This is going to be a big problemo, by the way, for them. It is, because these people don't give a shit about America. They just don't. No offense to these people. They just don't. I know them. They don't care. They don't care.
And so this has led to a sort of rift in the conservative movement and people like Charlie Kirk trying to sort of give credence to the voices of Elon Musk and Vivek. But I am proud that Charlie Kirk has really come out against Elon Musk and Vivek's statements and has been very explicit that why in the hell would we as Americans want more H-1B visas when we could just train and hire American people? That makes zero sense. That the whole America First movement, the whole MAGA movement is about American children and American prosperity and people who live in this country. And so we need people that have a focus and devotion toward the thriving of the nation, loving your neighbor as yourself, and not a devotion towards their own profits, which is, again, we can see the Antichrist spirit seeping in. And so Steve Bannon has been one of the people that have been very outspoken recently. And I just want to share what he posted 2 days ago.
I want to read from Elon Musk last night, of which I've been the strongest advocate that Elon was a central part of Trump's victory, right? And particularly being smart enough using his engineer's brain to understand it was about to get out the vote canvassing and low propensity, low information voters. Elon said last night, and Raheem will jump in here in a moment with Poso and go through some other even nastier tweets he put up last night about MAGA being racist, which is the last refuge of a scoundrel in modern politics, to quote Andrew Breitbart via Johnson, right? This last night, we put it up on the screen. I'd appreciate it. This is Elon Musk. The reason I'm in America, along with so many critical people who built SpaceX, Tesla, and hundreds of other companies that made America strong, is because of H-1B. Take a big step back and F yourself, all caps, in the face. F yourself in the face. I will go to war on this issue, the likes of which you cannot possibly comprehend. Oh yeah, tough guy? You're going to go to war on the likes of which you cannot possibly comprehend. You're a man-child, to be blunt. I hate to make it personal, but what you have done is try.
And ironically, that's exactly the criticism of Elon Musk's father to him. He's talked about how Elon needs to grow up. And many of the criticisms, if you can dive into some of the strong criticisms of Elon Musk is that he's entirely motivated about his own image and self-worth, which, if that's the case, and it's really about profit margins and continuing to be the wealthiest man in the world, and that this whole humble facade isn't real, it makes sense why Tesla and all his companies are highly, highly indebted to the H-1B visa, because that's how they can get cheaper work.
Try to trash individuals punching down. Remember, the first rule of gladiator school, bro, don't punch down. Either punch up here or punch up. I want to read from...
and so I wanted to highlight this, which was also from that same stream. It was later in that
This is
clip.
a total, let me repeat, if you didn't get it, it's a total incomplete scam. Not on the margins, a total complete. And I recommend right now that Elon back it up right there with all the geniuses, all the Einsteins that came in. Let's see the record. Let's see the resumes. And let's the American people see, and they decide whether American citizens with degrees and experience couldn't have filled those billets. And this is a total. Let me repeat. If you did.
And there's another clip. So he's saying, well, let's look at these resumes of these H-1B workers and see how good are they actually. And this is him from I think a couple years ago, talking about, and this is one of the things. I have my own criticisms of Steve Bannon. I'm not here to promote any particular person here, but just highlighting what the kind of the fallout and how this is going to be related to this conversation we're going to watch with Peter Thiel and Apocalypse Now, how these technologies are moving us in a very fast, progressive momentum towards what even Peter Thiel describes as the end times or biblical end times. But it's Musk transhumanism. And this is a point in which I strongly agree with Steve Bannon. He's incredibly anti-transhumanist. And he, for the last few years, until Musk kind of hopped on the Trump bandwagon, had been very critical of Elon Musk as somebody you can't trust because he is a transhumanist. And I know from things that I've seen Bannon say that he does associate the transhumanist movement with the sort of antichrist spirit. So this was his, this is a video of him talking about Elon I think a couple years ago.
Elon Musk, once again, brother, I'm smart enough to tell you no to your face, and I'm evil enough to be able to expose you as a running dog for the greatest enemy this nation's ever had. You're a war profiteer. You're sleeping with the enemy, brother, and you've been doing it because you're not an American nationalist. You're not even an American. All you are is a globalist, okay? A globalist. Elon Musk.
And I wish I could find the clip. I didn't catch it before, of him talking about Elon Musk as a transhumanist. Here's him talking about how he's a complete phony. Let's check this out.
The collapse of the neoliberal order, which is predicated upon the slave labor of China, the Lao Beijing, gives us an opportunity to throw off the chains of working class people everywhere, right? Regardless of race or gender or religion, right? And we have a unique opportunity to do that in this, and that's going to come. That's why populism's on the rise, and particularly that's why right-wing. When I'm proud to be a right-wing populist, that's why right-wing populism's on the rise.
So Min Liang Tan, co-founder and CEO of Razer, tweeted, "I think Twitter should buy SVB and become a digital bank." Elon Musk replied, "I'm open to the idea." Seems a bit silly. I don't know. What would you think about that?
I think until Elon Musk starts letting back on the true anti-CCP people that he keeps blocked off there, myself included, not that I want to go on.
Now, this is where, and I'm just going to highlight this right here. This is where I have problems with Steve Bannon, is that many of the MAGA movement are very reluctant to speak out against one of the major enemies of American freedom, and that is Israel, and just obviously based on the limitations of these platforms, the people that reside in Israel, specifically the demographic, which has to prove their ancestry in Israel. You get what I'm saying here. And you can look at things like the Kalergi plan and various reasons why there is a historical animosity and things that are happening in Ukraine. If you haven't seen recently, there's a faux Orthodox priest that's been promoted by Zelensky, arguing that all Ukrainian Christians need to convert to Judaism. Sort of reemergence of Khazaria. And we know that Elon Musk, for example, remember he posted that one tweet that was just slightly critical of the Jays in Israel, and then next week he was with Ben Shapiro at Auschwitz. You guys remember that? And ever since then, Musk has never said a critical word of Israel. And this is my biggest problem, because when we get into the Orthodox world, when we get into the prophecies of the end times, and I'm getting ready to promote this book real quick, guys, it's explicit. If you listen to Metropolitan Neophytos, if you listen to St. Paisios, you listen to some of our saints and elders discuss the spiritual warfare that's happening on this planet and who Israel is, the true Israel, the Orthodox Church, the true upholders of the Second Covenant. We know who the chosen people actually are. And as I'll be reading when I do this book next, the section I have tagged here is literally just talking about how the Jewish Messiah is the Christian Antichrist. That's just theological fact. Theological fact. And unfortunately, a vast swath of the American evangelical and Protestant population actually venerate a nation that is totally divorced from its historical legitimacy of the Judah, the nation of Israel. The modern day Israel has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the Rothschilds, the Balfour Declaration, all this different stuff. Again, I'm sure you guys have already dove into that, and I can't get into too much detail just due to some of the limitations on the platform. But anyways, I'm digressing here. But as an Orthodox Christian, this stuff is much more explicit, right? We know what to look out for. We know, as Father Turbo said on my channel, you can't be an Orthodox Christian and be a Zionist. You can't. And unfortunately, almost all the people that we've mentioned here, Ramaswamy, Elon Musk, and unfortunately, from my understanding, Steve Bannon, many of the people in the MAGA movement, Trump himself, although it sounds like Trump has actually a beef with Netanyahu, which maybe given Trump's sort of egotistical alpha male disposition, maybe that will play favorably in America's future. But apparently they're at odds. And Netanyahu was the first one to congratulate Joe Biden and legitimated the 2020 election. And apparently there's been some choice words that Netanyahu has had regarding Trump, and Trump is aware of this. So but I mean, my gosh, have you seen Ivanka Trump? She converted to Judaism. She, like, on Christmas, she's out there promoting Judaism. Judaism and Christianity are antithesis of each other because of the explicit claims regarding the Messiah. That's just a fact. That's a fact. So anyway, some people send in some super chats. Rachel Wilson, my sister, thank you so much. She sends in $5, says, great stream. Let's help DPH hit the goal. Thank you so much, Rachel. God bless you. And Albert throws in $10. Thank you so much, Albert. He throws in $10. No comment. Thank you very much, brother. And Ursh Man throws in $5, says much respect. Thank you very much, Ursh. And again, guys, please, I would greatly appreciate if you could help me reach my goal. But if you would like to use DonoChat or Streamlabs, please use that as well. I'd greatly appreciate it. Anyways, let's just watch the end of this. I think this is the clip where he talks about Elon Musk as an explicit transhumanist, which he is.
Oh, yeah. No. He's owned by the Chinese Communist Party. What are you talking about? Tesla, his only thing of real value is Tesla. He uses it for margin loans. He sells the stock. The Shanghai joint venture is 100% controlled by the CCP. This is why he never goes after the CCP. This is why he always backs off. This is when they had the protest.
Steve, why does he never go after Israel or their genocide against the Palestinians? I think that's a more pressing question.
They had the protests about the lockdowns of COVID. He will not do it. Elon Musk is a total and complete phony. He is in bed in a business partner. He's done some good stuff, letting stuff out, with Taibbi and others is fine. But he is owned lock, stock, and barrel by the Chinese Communist Party, and he acts like it. Right?
There was a story recently that they warned him to stop talking about lab leak.
100%.
He's got,
So this isn't the clip. One of the clips Bannon was talking about, he's an open transhumanist, but we're not going to sit here and watch a bunch of Steve Bannon clips. But anyways, you guys kind of get it. And one of the interesting things too that I found in doing a little bit of research, and it wasn't in the Wikipedia page here, but Elon Musk created a company with his brother called Zip2. And interestingly, I found a couple things online. There was a couple YouTube videos that found and validated what I was saying, is that Jeffrey Epstein was involved. So very interesting that Elon and his brother Kimball had financial ties to Jeffrey Epstein in one of their early startup companies called Zip2, which provided licensed online city guide, essentially a digital yellow pages. And then I went to the Wikipedia page and I couldn't find Jeffrey Epstein's name anywhere. So again, I think, as we talked about with I think Elon Musk is not somebody that can be trusted in any way. I think he's the ultimate gaslighter, and he's somebody who has, I believe, nefarious intentions ultimately. And so I always hear people say, yeah, but he bought X and it's so good. But why would you buy X? If you own, and he went on Rogan, and this was famous like 3 or 4 years ago when he smoked weed on Rogan, talking about how dangerous AI is. This is an existential risk to humanity. Agreed. And then his solution is that we have to fuse with the AI through his technology of Neuralink. Now, if that's the case, and he has Grok AI, he invested in ChatGPT when it was a non-for-profit. He has Tesla AI. Now, if that's the case, and he is buying X, my personal opinion is that the reasons why he pulled back some of the censorship of the previous Twitter regime in regards to X.com is so that he can map global discourse, everything that's being said, who says what are the hot conversations in India, in China, in America, in New Zealand, what are people talking about? And that way, his AI systems, I mean, you have to be a fool not to think that an AI, some type of programmable system, is not mapping all of this digital discourse into a database. It absolutely is. And if you are creating Starlink and the Neuralink, and you have the ultimate app right now on X.com, because you did allow certain speech that was prohibited before to now express itself, and it is extending and changing and moving the Overton window. And you're trying to move us all to an electrical digital grid. You're a big promoter of global climate change. Your whole telos, your whole end goal here is a sort of global one world government in the name of and pigging back upon Donald Trump and the MAGA movement, which is explicitly populist nationalist. If he is the ultimate gaslighter, it's the perfect play. It's the perfect play, because then he can ostracize the extreme left, which nobody really likes. Even leftists don't really like the extreme left. And then he can incorporate the right wing. And now when we see with the H-1B visa, he can then disenfranchise not an extreme right. There was a poll today that was published that 60% of Trump voters are in favor of limiting H-1B visas. So this is not a fringe position or opinion within the MAGA Trump world. It's actually the majority. But you can see how he's ostracizing them. So he's taking like a huge core of the middle ground here and getting people to think that he's some freedom fighter, when really he is building the digital enslavement system. And he's sitting here with, for Halloween with a $8,000 Halloween costume titled "The Devil's Champion." All right, guys. So we're going to now, I'm going to do some quick housekeeping, and then we're going to get into Peter Thiel's conversation on biblical ancient prophecies and modern technology here. Rigovich sent in $2 and says, can anyone be in politics and not be a Zionist? Well, I think Thomas Massey, one of the only consistent people I've seen is Thomas Massey out of Kentucky. He is Republican, but he's very honest about AIPAC. He's very honest about the influence of the Israeli lobby, the Jewish lobby. He's been very honest about, people like Congressman Mike Johnson, who's a total weakling globalist who portrays himself as some like fundamental Christian, sending billions of dollars to Ukraine. How much money has North Carolina got? Not very much. Not very much. What has Congress, who controls the purse, the money of the federal, what have they done? Oh, nothing. What did they do just days before Christmas when all the congressmen are trying to get out of town so that they can be home for Christmas with their families? He created a $1,500 spending bill that was over $1 trillion, and he considers himself a fiscal conservative. And in it was a promotion of left-wing ideology and even a renaming of sexual offenders or criminal offenders as like, I forget what the language was. Somebody already knows it. It was something like a legal representative or something like that. So you can no longer call people offenders. I mean, our government is held hostage by a multitude of Zionists. I think it's very difficult to get into the U.S. political system without being a Zionist. But I think what gives me hope is the younger generation being more outspoken and more aware of what's going on. And this is where I can see, X.com has been incredibly beneficial to changing the narrative and especially the criticism of Israel and Judaism. It's just a fact. And when you look at what Israel's doing to the Palestinians and what, I mean, it's hard not to notice. It's hard not to notice. So thank you very much, Rigovich. And Joe Woken throws in $8.99 and says, "All saints of God intercede for us all." Amen to that. Make sure to say your prayers. And ultimately, God's providence is going to work out. So none of this should lead us towards fear of anything. But we certainly need to be diligent and be aware and make sure that we have discernment regarding many of the things going on. Neon throws in $5 over on Streamlabs, and he says, "People forget history. Look to the Bible and the lessons there. Remember what happened to the kings of Israel back in the day. The Holy Father blessed them and the people, and what happened to them? Humble thyself." Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Neon, for the support. Really appreciate that, my man. Okay, so before we get into it, now we're going to dive into this conversation here with Peter Thiel, and I do want to do some housekeeping, but I had to play this because if you guys aren't aware, as I mentioned earlier, Peter Thiel sued Gawker back in the day because they outed him as a homosexual, and he was so mad about it that Hulk Hogan was filing a lawsuit against Gawker, and Peter Thiel, being a billionaire, funded it and put Gawker out of business. And I believe Gawker was left-wing or something. So I'm not in favor of Gawker or anything, but I found this really interesting that this is from the 2016 when President Trump got elected at the Republican National Convention, of him talking about being a proud gay. And so just keep this in mind when we watch his interview here on Apocalypse Now, Ancient Prophecies and Modern Technology.
When I was a kid, the great debate was about how to defeat the Soviet Union, and we won. Now we are told that the great debate is about who gets to use which bathroom. This is a distraction from our real problems. Who cares?
Well, I think fathers with daughters actually do care because of the sexual harassment. There was a video that was circulating on X just recently of a man going to a public park, and it was actually an African-American man, and he was with his daughter, and he was taking her to the little girl's room, and he opens the door and he goes, "You know what? Hold up. Let me go in there and just check." He walks in there, and lo and behold, there's a man in one of the stalls waiting what appears to be for a little girl. And he goes, "Oh, my bad. I was just using the restroom. Didn't know where I was." Really? Really? And we've already seen, I mean, all the sexual crimes that these transformers have been a part of. I think there's a lot of reason to care who goes into what places. And really, it's an attack on women. But as a homosexual man, it probably doesn't really affect you much. And your care for women probably isn't that central. Look at all these normie conservative. It's so funny. "Oh yeah, that's not a problem. I want trannies in the bathroom."
Of course, every American has a unique identity. I am proud to be gay. I am proud to be a Republican. But most of all, I am proud to be an American. When I
Nothing says conservative values like being a proud gay man. So, anyways, guys, just want to do some quick housekeeping. One of the best ways to support my work, please do so, is go over to my website and become a website member. I got exclusive video content. All my show notes are available for $5 a month. Also, we have premium think tank meetings twice a month with people all over the world where we talk about many of the latest happenings around the world with very intelligent and insightful people. That's for $25 a month. If you sign up, you get a membership for a year. You get 2 months free. Also, oh, and let me share that link. So you can do so with this link right here. And if you would be interested in signing up for a one-on-one session where we get into a private Zoom meeting with just you and me, and we talk about any topic your heart's desire, you can do so with this link right here. Would greatly appreciate that. And if you would like to sponsor a stream, we have the next sponsored stream will be the next stream we do, which will be Wednesday or Thursday, and it'll be covering this book right here, Elders on the End Times, The World Before the Second Coming of Christ. This is the latest publication of the non-for-profit that I've partnered with called the Eschaton Vigil. And I'm going to give you guys a link. If you use promo code COTEL, you'll get $5 off the price of this book. This is a book that hasn't been translated in English, just like Russia Before the Second Coming. And this is a Romanian text, though it has prophecies from Orthodox saints and elders from, Greece and Russia. But we'll be covering this book here in the next stream, and that is a sponsored stream. And if you would like to sponsor a stream, please go to this link right here and do so. Would greatly appreciate that. And again, as I said, this book, if you go to the eschatonvigil.org/shop, let me share that link with you right here. You go to that link and you can purchase. So we've already covered the eschatological visions of the blessed, end time prophecies of elders and saints of the Orthodox Church. We did a whole stream going over that book. In fact, we talked a little bit about that book with Father Peter Thiel. And then more recently, we did going over Russia Before the Second Coming. This is a very interesting, unique Russian text regarding eschatology that has never before been translated into English, which we now have. And this is the latest publication. It is now available, Elders on the End Times, right here, Elders on the End Times, The World Before the Second Coming of Christ. And Elders on the End Times brings together prophetic wisdom from revered Orthodox Christian saints, elders, and theologians, offering guidance for navigating the spiritual and moral challenges of our age, addressing critical topics such as global control, the mark of the Antichrist, and the signs of the times. This collection provides practical counsel for living a life of faith, repentance, and vigilance. Rooted in the deep spiritual heritage of the Orthodox Christianity, these teachings illuminate the path to salvation while inspiring hope in Christ's ultimate triumph. Meticulously translated from the original Romanian text, this book is both a call to action and a source of strength for those seeking clarity and courage in the face of today's uncertainties. Again, when you go to check out, use promo code COTEL, and you'll get $5 off your purchase. Now, I know many people are a little upset about not being able to get shipped to internationally. So depending on what country you're in, and I just want to tell you that you can contact, let me share this email with you guys. So it's jtg@eschatonvigil.org, jtg@eschatonvigil.org. And if you are international, you can contact him, and it'll be more expensive, obviously, because of shipping prices, but you can potentially navigate and organize something to get the book sent to you. So use that email address, talk to the Eschaton Vigil, and see if they can help you out, potentially purchase the book for you, and then send it to you for an additional price based on shipping costs. So only on Amazon, because of some of the contents that are in this book, and you guys can probably imagine what that is, Only the Eschatological Vision of the Blessed is available on Amazon. These two texts have some things that may not be totally suitable. We'll put it that way. And so those are on a different platform. I'm not going to say who or where, but they're on a different platform for publication. So if you would like to get one of these books, I highly, highly recommend it. If you're interested in Orthodox eschatology and the insights of the saints and the elders, go purchase one of these books. Again, the latest one, Elders on the End Times. This is Romanian text, newly translated into English. Really excited what the what the Eschaton Vigil is doing in many of the publications they're making available. So shout out to them. Yes, Elon Musk rats. So thank you guys very much for that. And please do purchase those if you're interested. And then the last thing I want to say, if you guys are in the market for any Orthodox items, please check out orthodoxdepot.com. Use promo code COTEL. You will get 10% off any items. You can get prayer ropes, incense lamps, icons, all types of stuff. It's a good Orthodox company here in the Midwest. Use promo code COTEL. You help me out. You'll help them out. So if you're looking and you're in the market for any Orthodox stuff, please check them out before going somewhere else if you'd like to support my work and theirs. And again, at the eschatonvigil.org, use promo code COTEL, COTEL, and get your $5 off your book. So thank you guys for that. Now, without further ado, let's get into the stream today and analyze Mr. Peter Thiel and see how he's presenting himself as a sort of voice of reason within the tech oligarch world. Now, I listened to this at like 1.5, so we're going to tone it down to 1.25 because if you've ever listened to Peter Thiel speak, he does stutter quite a bit, and he's a little bit slower in getting his thoughts out. But we're going to see that he has some actually interesting things to say. But keep in mind, while we're watching Peter Thiel, that he runs a company, Palantir, which is literally one of the ultimate aggregators of online data, which sells that data to places like the CIA, NSA, central banks, so that they can track your digital footprint. And this is a private company for hire, and some of their services are for hire by the wealthiest people in the world. So interesting as they go into the discussion of the apocalypse and biblical end times and the erection of a one world government kingdom. It's curious to see how some of the things that he is contributing to actually catalyzes and aids in that ultimate effort, even though he himself, and I will give Peter Thiel this, he's not a transhumanist. So he is a very much a pro technology and innovation, Silicon Valley billionaire. Like I said, companies where you can purchase young people's blood and inject it into yourself for wealthy clients. He was kind of if you guys remember the Cambridge Analytic scandal that happened with Facebook, where they were a third party was essentially collecting all people's personal data. That is kind of the business that Peter Thiel is also in, and that was a controversy that he was a part of. But keep in mind that the person, again, that we're going to be listening to has his foot in many of these areas. So here we go.
The end times, Armageddon, the Antichrist. If you suppose the only people who take those concepts seriously are snake handlers in the hollers of Kentucky, think again. Peter Thiel on Uncommon Knowledge now. Welcome to Uncommon Knowledge. I'm Peter Robinson. Peter Thiel earned his undergraduate and law degrees here at Stanford. He was a co-founder of PayPal, the firm that all but invented fintech, the first outside investor in Facebook, the firm that all but invented social networks, and a co-founder of Palantir, the firm that all but invented defense tech. Although he's staying out of politics, this year, Mr. Thiel has had a hand in launching the careers of a number of political figures, including J.D. Vance. Mr. Thiel speaks often on philosophy, religion, tech, and society in forums as diverse as the Cambridge Union, the Aspen Ideas Festival, and the Joe Rogan Experience. You gave Joe Rogan 3 hours? Peter, it's about time you came back to this.
I was trapped for three hours there.
And so before we get in, we've had a few super chats sent in. I just want to address all those so we're caught up. Somebody named Vishnu #1 God sent in $3 and says, "Hello, sir. I have come here to tell you I have your job now. Please give me your computer password now so I can start, please, sir. I need payment. Only Target gift card, please. $500 and do not redeem and show me." Thank you, Vishnu #1 God, for that super chat. Do appreciate, and definitely not a Palantir bot. Sends in $1 and says, "Peter Thiel has come to smoke meth, touch your sons, and sell all your data to the CIA." Pretty much. And Jay Hamza sends in a generous $25 over on Dono Chat and says, "This is something you briefly talked about. It talks about the elites and how they are trying to stay young, mummies, cannibals, and vampires, the history of corpse medicine from the Middle Ages to Falun Gong." Richard Soong is the author. I'll have to check that out, Jay Hamza. Thank you very much. Do appreciate that, my man. And I think I saw one on YouTube here. Oh, yeah. Nicholas Clinton throws in $10, says, "Just joined a few minutes ago. Did you see what Ford Motor Company tweeted earlier? Great stream, DPH. You're a gym man." Well, thank you very much, Nicholas. And I did. So for what anybody who's not aware what Nicholas Clinton is referring to is the Ford Motor Company account was hacked earlier today and basically was railing against Israel and its war crimes. And essentially, if you guys are aware of one of a book that I actually have, it's ironic enough, I have on the way, is a book by Henry Ford called The International Jew. The International Jew. And it has to do with a series of pamphlets he wrote in the early 20th century. Here, let me see. I had a description about it. Let me see if I can find that real quick. And one second. It's very, very interesting. It'll make a lot more sense regards to Nicholas's comment. Let me see if I can find it real quick. So thrift. Let me see if I can pull this tab over to this one so we can see. Okay, here we go. Okay. So this is a book that I myself purchased today. It's called The International Jew, The World's Foremost Problem by Henry Ford. And if you read a little bit about the overview, it is a 4-volume set of booklets or pamphlets published and distributed in the early 1920s by Henry Ford. In spring 1920, Ford made his personal newspaper, the Dearborn Independent Chronicle, what he considered the Jewish menace. Every week for 91 issues, the paper exposed some sort of inspired evil major story in a headline. The most popular and aggressive stories were then chosen to be reprinted into the 4 volumes called The International J, Volume 1. And so, anyways, that is a little bit on the history of Henry Ford. And so somebody today hacked the Ford Motor Company's Twitter account and began posting things very reminiscent of the personal opinions of himself, Henry Ford. So thank you very much, Nicholas Clinton. Do appreciate that, my man. And Plutonian Production throws in $2, says, "Just found you recently, Proverbs 31:8. Well, thank you very much, Plutonian Productions. Do appreciate that. And our sister, Slowboard Whiteboard, she said, "Great stream tonight." Well, thank you, Kristen. God bless you and the family. And thank you for supporting my channel for 21 months. That's incredible. Thank you so, so much. And shout out to my brother, Blue Skittle, who says, "How much for a sponsored stream reviewing the James Lindsay sword?" Oh, man, I'd love to do a full stream just trying to take down James Lindsay. That would be a lot of fun. I would enjoy that. If I know you're kind of joking, Blue Skittle, but if anyone would be interested in sponsoring a takedown video or video just going over the entirety of James Lindsay's nonsense, please do so with this link right here. That would be a fun one to do. But thank you so much, Blue Skittle. God bless you, brother. Okay, now with that being said, let's get into the convo.
Peter Thiel on the end times. Today, by the way, this is going to be episode 1 of 2, our first conversation on this very large topic. Peter, 2 quotations. Matthew 24, 35, 36. Quote, heaven and earth will pass away, but of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven. Close quote. Peter Thiel. We don't know the day and the hour, but maybe we can guess the century. Explain yourself.
Well, man, this is a very broad topic. It's in this larger question about the extraordinary history of our time. The modern world, from maybe Renaissance onward, has been this world of ever progressing scientific and technological development, and there is this very profound sense that there are things that change. There are dimensions of technology, military technology, communications technology, where things are not timeless and eternal. They're sort of, and there was a gunpowder revolution in the 17th century, and that changed the social structure and the political structure, and there is a certain arc to history. It's not just technology, but it is a driver, and certainly, and again, many different ways of getting at this, but there certainly are dimensions of the technology that have become extremely powerful in the last century or two, that have an apocalyptic dimension, and perhaps it's strange not to try to relate it to the biblical tradition. If nuclear weapons can rain down fire and brimstone and destroy the world, and then we have a biblical tradition that maybe doesn't say that this is inevitably going to happen, but that something like this might well happen if humans are left to their own devices. Should we at least be asking questions? Figure out ways for these things to inform one another.
So obviously we'll come in a moment to the analyses, to the signs of the end times.
Interesting comment mentioned here is how could he be worried about the end times to be a proud gay man? Well, I think that's what makes the conversation so interesting, is at least the way that he presents it is Peter Thiel is very much interested and takes serious the book of Revelation. And we're going to see throughout this convo is he takes very serious the idea of a potential apocalyptic event and the rise of the Antichrist. Now, one of the ironic things is that he mentions that he believes the Antichrist is going to be a person who constantly talks about the Antichrist. Irony being that he himself talks or mentions how he's the only one in the tech world that takes the sort of apocalyptic eschatological dimension of the Bible seriously. But as you can see by his own sexual preferences, that he is a sort of progressive individual himself, yet he's also a conservative Republican libertarian. So kind of takes on all the labels. And I think this is what is so difficult to pinpoint, whether it be Peter Thiel or Elon Musk, is that there's so many ways that you could label them, right? So Elon Musk is incredibly anti-communist, but then he has a baby with Grimes, the musician, who is an open, devout communist. And while they were dating, she took a photo op reading Marx's Communist Manifesto. And then they named their child X. It was like X dash something number. I mean, what a weird name to name your child. And apparently there's, Musk claims that he was like abused by his father, and his father is kind of a strange man. As I said, he has 2 children with his stepdaughter. His mother, May Musk. I mean, I can't really put my finger on it, but something seems to be a little bit interesting there as well. But what a weird thing to name your child X when your first company that you started was X.com. That gets bought out by what becomes PayPal. Then you, in some type of document, you force the claim that you are a co-founder of PayPal, which you weren't. You founded another company, which became antiquated in that you were bought out by PayPal. And also, like I said, same thing you did with Tesla. He wrote legal documents forcing his name to be associated as a founder of Tesla when Tesla was founded by 2 other gentlemen well before Musk even invested in them. They created the Tesla Roadster before Musk even got involved. So Musk, I mean, it's like these guys, there's so many labels you can put on them. Peter Thiel, I don't know, it seems to maybe be a little bit more genuine, but he presents himself as a Christian who's in tech, but he's not a fundamentalist because apparently he came from like evangelical fundamentalist parents or something. He's some type of Protestant. Well, let me say, he may be a sort of a Catholic light. So he's very much, and Rene Girard's going to appear in this conversation multiple times, who was a Catholic, and he wrote about the scapegoating and the self-sacrifice of Christ and this type of stuff. Apparently this was influential to Peter Thiel. Actually, I found it right here. So in his personal life, this is just Wikipedia, so, you know, not a great source, but you know, he had a longtime partner, and then he had another relationship with Jeff Thomas, who died suddenly in March 2023, which I don't know how he died, so not saying, but maybe it was the jab, who knows. But Thiel is a self-described Christian and a promoter of Rene Girard's Christian anthropology. He grew up in an evangelical household, but as of 2011, described his religious beliefs as somewhat heterodox, stating, "I believe Christianity is true, but I don't sort of feel a compelling need to convince other people of that." Thiel has participated in the Veritas Forum events with the noted theologian N.T. Wright, discussing religion, politics, and technology. During his time at Stanford University, Thiel attended a lecture given by Rene Girard. Girard, a Catholic, explained the role of sacrifice and the scapegoat mechanism in resolving social conflict, which appealed to Thiel as it offered a basis for his Christian faith without the fundamentalism of his parents.
But first, a moment on why you're asking these questions. And as I understand your argument, Peter.
What the heck?
Have a biblical tradition that maybe doesn't say that this is inevitably going to happen, but that something like this might well happen if humans are left to their own devices. Where this is a very broad topic. Is
35:36, quote, "Heaven and earth will pass away, but of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven," close quote. Peter Thiel, "We don't know the day and the hour, but maybe we can guess the century." Explain yourself.
Well, man, this is a very broad topic. It's in this larger question about the extraordinary history of our time. The modern world, from maybe Renaissance onward, has been this world of ever progressing scientific and technological development, and there's this very profound sense that there are things that change. There's dimensions of technology, military technology, communications technology, where things are not timeless and eternal. They're sort of, and there was a gunpowder revolution in the 17th century, and that changed the social structure and the political structure, and there is a certain arc to history. It's not just technology, but it is a driver, and certainly and again, many different ways of getting at this, but there certainly are dimensions of the technology that have become extremely powerful in the last century or two, that have an apocalyptic dimension, and perhaps it's strange not to try to relate it to the biblical tradition. If nuclear weapons can rain down fire and brimstone and destroy the world, and then we have a biblical tradition that maybe doesn't say that this is inevitably going to happen, but that something like this might well happen if humans are left to their own devices. Should we at least be asking questions? Figure out ways for these things to inform one another.
So obviously we'll come in a moment to the analyses, to the signs of the end times. But first, a moment on why you're asking these questions. And as I understand your argument, Peter, you feel you need to ask them and to prompt a conversation, at least in part, because universities won't, which is odd in some ways. The biblical framework, these texts may be 2,000 years old, but they've informed Western civilization and taken up the time of scholars through these centuries. It has been an understanding in Western culture at least, that history is going someplace. And if there is an endpoint, no matter how far off in the future it may be, we're closer to it now than we were 2000. All right, so all of these seem to me plausible, valid, and serious questions. Why are universities ill-equipped to grapple with this?
Well, that's very overdetermined, but certainly anything that if there's some relation between the university and the universe, where it is supposed to somehow, in its ideal form, in its early modern 17th, 18th century form, the university was supposed to represent some kind of integration of knowledge across a lot of disciplines, where they all would fit together. And for a variety of reasons one can cite, this has broken down over time. There are ideological reasons, but maybe there also are practical reasons, where the amount of knowledge became too great for any single person to master, and then you had ever division into ever narrower subdisciplines. Adam Smith has this metaphor in the 19th century of a pin factory. We're manufacturing pins, and there are 100 people in the pin factory, and they're all doing different things, and nobody knows how to make a pin anymore. So it's this, it's efficient, but it's this hyper specialization. And there's probably been an analog to that on the university side, where maybe someone like Goethe could still understand something about everything, or Hilbert, a great mathematician around 1900, could still understand all of math, and he would set these 25 problems for the 20th century for mathematicians to solve. In some ways, set the agenda for the field of mathematics, and even as rigorous a subject area as mathematics, in some ways, has devolved into something close to literary theory, where one mathematician doesn't know what the other one's doing, and it's sort of these very incommensurate modes of discourse, and anything that has to do with making sense of the larger whole has gotten badly lost. And I thought for a long time that we need to ask a variety of questions, about the larger whole. One kind of scientific and technological question is simply, are we still progressing as we were in early modernity? Are things, by whatever metric you choose, are they getting better? Is life expectancy going up? Is the GDP increasing? Is the quality of life by various metrics going up? Are we going faster? We're moving from planes to supersonic planes to space planes.
And it's interesting to note that when he's talking about these metrics of societal progress as a Christian, he's never mentioning the sort of spiritual ramifications of the societies that we live in. So it's kind of these empirical methods. Are people living longer? Does the GDP of your national government increasing? Which, again, you could see that I would assume, I haven't seen Peter Thiel weigh in on the H-1B visa debate that is still ongoing, but I would imagine that he's probably in favor of it due to its efficiency of creating higher profits and more efficiency within companies. But is that actually good for the well-being of a nation? And what would be Christian principles in regards to, again, loving your neighbor as yourself and making sure that you give your neighbor the best opportunity so that they could provide and have a flourishing family with children and a loving wife? So that isn't mentioned, and you can't help but think maybe his lifestyle contributes to that. But what does progress in a Christian context mean if GDP is going up and people's spiritual and spiritual well-beings is declining? Doesn't make a lot of sense.
And that seems like a very basic kind of macroeconomic question, incredibly hard to ask, but surely an important one. And then and I've spoken about this in many other contexts, but my intuition is that in many places there's been relative stagnation. The hyper-specialization disguises a certain type of decadence. We have these narrow experts saying how wonderful they are. The cancer researchers say they're going to cure cancer in the next 5 years, and string people say they're the smartest physicists and they know everything. But maybe it's just some weird academic power game where they're blocking everybody else, and on and on. And so there is even before we get to the big question of history, there's a question just of, the history of science and technology. It progressed a lot. Maybe it's progressing more slowly. Why has that changed? What's going on there?
You said, so fragmentation, hyper-specialization in the university, the feeling that
and this is where this focus, Peter Thiel is very vocal about his criticism of the academy. And I believe he has a foundation where he will provide $100,000 to people who drop out of college and start a business. So people that already have some type of proclivity, and I would assume some type of STEM skill set. And so he's very openly critical of the university, and rightfully so. As somebody who's in it, it's terrible. It's a nightmare. But to localize the criticism and talking about the apocalyptic dimension of technology and why is the university not dealing with it seems to be moving the focus to a very limited group of people, which, again, the secularism and the Marxist and leftist sentiments within universities overwhelmingly dominate.
Kind of disintegration into silos. That's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it, I'm checking this, and this is the form of a question, is whether an extreme rationalism maybe emerges from that specialization or maybe informs it. But I've heard you say, I've got a quotation here from you, under the rationalist view, you can't even talk about the end of your own life, let alone the end of the world. That there's something about the regnant view. I'm trying to resist the word ideology because ideology isn't quite the right, but the way the university conducts its business rules out questions of life, death, sin, redemption, the meaning of history. And yet those are so what I'm trying to get at is hyper-specialization, yes. Is there also something else, something about the regnant view that makes it very hard for universities to grapple with big questions?
Yes, they seem hard to grapple with it. Why is probably harder to say. Certainly, if we do something like the Radical Life Extension Project, people in the 17th, 18th centuries were very optimistic about it. Benjamin Franklin, Francis Bacon, you had all these ideas that you could extend human lifespan by centuries. As late as the late 19th, early 20th century, there was a movement called Cosmism in the sort of around the time of the Soviet Revolution, 1920s Soviet Union, and it claimed that for the revolution to succeed, you had to physically resurrect all the dead people using science. And it was workers of the world unite, and to sort of get with the times, their slogan was "Dead of the world unite." And then, of course, they didn't make much progress on this. And then at some point, by the time you get to Stalin and the show trials, and the deaths seem to be going up, not down. But yeah,
there was a moment when they thought it might even be possible.
There was an incredible ambition and incredible energy to modern science. It was perhaps downstream from Christianity. If the promise of Christianity is a physical resurrection, then science could offer that too. Or it was a possibility. Maybe it was a rival to Christianity. You don't need Christianity if we can do it through science. And then there is a strange way that the project, in many dimensions, feels very exhausted. Even though, of course, people still genuflect to science. They believe in science with a capital S. But the ambition has been really beaten out. If you look at the individual scientists, it's much less of the sort of heroic, bold figure who breaks with dogmas and things for him or herself, and it's much more, in late modernity, you're just a robot in a, ever smaller cog in an ever bigger machine or something like this.
Right.
And when he's talking about cosmism, there's an interesting figure, in case you guys have never heard of him, Nikolai Fyodorov. He was a cosmist. He's kind of considered the founder of that movement, and he was a futurist. He tried to incorporate like Orthodox theology of theosis with scientific resurrection of the dead, a unification of all people. It was sort of, you see, immortality of all, ancestor veneration, all this type of stuff. And so he is a person who's sort of used as a figure to highlight that Christianity is compatible with transhumanism. But at the same time, I want to highlight that Peter Thiel is very critical of the transhumanist movement, specifically in its utopian millenarian pursuits for like world peace, indefinite lifespans, infinite intelligence, that type of stuff. So he is very critical of that. But I just wanted to show that for any of the Orthodox Christians out there, what he was referring to. And you guys can look Nikolai up more if you want to learn more about him. He's an interesting figure, but he's essentially a heretic that is used to promote the idea that cosmism, or his cosmism and pantheism, is compatible. His cosmic, and I don't mean cosmic in the St. Maximus the Confessor, but his cosmism and his heretical Orthodox Christianity is compatible with transhumanism. He was a precursor to transhumanism. Radical life extension, physical immortality, and resurrection of the dead using scientific methods.
This notion of the end of times in the biblical framework. René Girard, an important figure here, professor of French literature here at Stanford, but also a theologian, I think it's fair to call him a theologian, and philosopher, wrote very, very widely, although that was outside his Stanford work. You became friends with him. It happens that he was a neighbor of mine. We both knew René. All right, René Girard in 2009. Few still talk about the apocalypse. The apocalypse, of course, is the word referring to the destruction or end of the world as described in the book of Revelation. René, few still talk about the apocalypse, and they usually have a completely mythological conception of it. Strangely, they do not see that the violence we ourselves are in the process of amassing and that is looming over our own heads is entirely sufficient to trigger the worst, close quote. So there we come to the first question about how you understand these things. The apocalypse, as presented in the biblical framework, as symbols of spiritual realities, or the apocalypse as a plain prediction about how the world could or indeed will end.
Yeah, it's let's see. It is the way Girard would have put it, and the way I came to see it as well, was that in some sense, the apocalyptic prophecies are just a prediction of what humans are likely to do in a world in which they have ever more powerful technologies, in which there are no sacred limits on the use of these technologies, in which human nature has not, maybe not gotten worse, but has not gotten better, and it has this sort of, limitless violence aspect to it. It's and I think Girard had all these sort of provocative formulations, like it is just a scientific prediction of what humanity is likely to do in a world of ever more powerful technology. And then there sort of are all these different things on the same terms of the biblical apocalyptic accounts. But Girard was very skeptical of the idea that somehow the violence came from God, and he always thought that atheists and fundamentalists disagree on the secondary and relatively not so important question of whether or not God exists, but they agree on the far more important question that one of God's attributes is violence, and so the violence comes from God. And this is the new atheists.
In the evangelical view, the destruction of the world is God exercising justice on the world.
It is, it's
right.
It's some version of justice,
anger, wrath,
some version of the anger, wrath of God, and then the atheist one's a little bit stranger because you don't really believe God exists, but still it is somehow it's not humanity. Humanity is not that dangerous, at least in sort of the mainstream Lockean, Rousseauian accounts.
So you've made the point, I must admit I'd forgotten this, you've made the point that Rene used to observe that the church, the Catholic Church, in its liturgy and in homilies, used to make quite a lot of the end times and warn people to prepare for judgment and so forth. Up until 1945, when the church seems to have decided to go easier on that because people needed comfort more than exhortation about the end times. Obvious point, what happened in 1945?
Well, we got nuclear weapons, and this stuff became real in a way that seemed completely implausible in the 17th, 18th century. I mean, when people were writing even 19th century, it was the idea that the world was just too big a place. It could not possibly be destroyed. We didn't believe God would do it. We no longer believed that God was so violent that God would do it, even if you believed he existed. And then, the technology was getting more powerful, but it didn't quite seem possible to do something on a worldwide scale. The Napoleonic Wars are quite violent. World War I is significantly worse, but it's still somehow localized. It's not the whole planet. And then there is something that gets released with nuclear weapons, and maybe even more with thermonuclear weapons, and then you end up building not dozens, but thousands and thousands of them in the 60s and 70s.
Rene's point that the apocalyptic literature correctly read is simply a prediction of what human beings will do to each other suddenly becomes, up until 1945, you say, wait a minute, how could human beings possibly be responsible for the end of the world? And after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the answer is only too obvious.
Yeah, there's all this sort of, there's liberal theologian writing in 1780. The argument for why you should read apocalyptic literature is because occasionally you get these millenarian movements and people go crazy, and it's worth reminding yourselves of the madness of crowds. And then the secondary reason you can read it is for your amusement, and that was sort of the Enlightenment optimism circa 1780. And there were of course all these incredibly scary ideas. The Antichrist would kill so many people. He would come with a crematorium to burn the bodies of all the people he killed. And it was just this sort of lurid medieval notions people had. And of course, then after the end of Hitler in 1945, this stuff just wasn't so funny anymore. And then Girard's intuition was that it's almost like when a knowledge becomes too real and too close, it's like I don't like psychological repression or something like this, but you want to sort of steer away from it.
We can't bear to look at it.
We don't want to talk about it quite as much. We need to reassure people. We need to tell people this is not really what it's about. And of course, there were all these strange elements of the mythical that were brought in. It was named after all these terrible gods from ancient Greece. The Saturn, the god who ate his own children, and Zeus throws down thunderbolts, and we have fire raining down with Jupiter rockets from the heavens. So there was this strange return of the mythical in this very in the equations of the physicists.
Developments since 1940. Again, Rene, the violence we ourselves are in the process of amassing. So developments since 1945, two quotations here. Sir Martin Rees, in his 2003 book, Our Final Century, there's a cheerful title for you. The nuclear threat will be overshadowed by others that could be as destructive and far less controllable. Advanced technology will offer new instruments for creating terror and devastation. Instant universal communications will amplify their societal impact. This is over 20 years ago. Disastrous accidents, for instance, the unintended creation or release of a noxious, fast-spreading pathogen, are possible. I think the odds are no better than 50-50 that we will survive to the end of the present century. Quotation 2, Revelation 16:16. And the demonic spirits assembled the kings at the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. I want to get the word Armageddon in here because you use it. It's important in your analysis. Okay, so the notion is the idea of some kind of final cataclysmic event. Revelation tells us that in a book written some 2,000 years ago. Martin Rees's book is written 21 years ago, and it's all entirely plausible.
Sure. I think that there is a way we can come back to this in describing all of this in a much more rationalist, non-theological way. So you can talk about existential risk, and there's existential risk of nuclear war. There's existential risk of bioweapons or dangerously engineered bioweapons, maybe of AI and killer robots or autonomous weapon systems guided by AI. There's existential risk around around the environment, maybe not just climate change, but maybe there's sort of all sorts of other dimensions where there's some argument we have one planet and you want to be a little bit careful and not mess it up totally.
Peter, on AI, I've never had a chance to just put this one to you. I don't know as much about it as you, obviously, but I've been aware of a technology that was so polarizing from the get-go. There are plenty of people who say, calm down, AI is going to lead to one medical breakthrough after another. It'll produce such abundance that we don't need to worry about jobs. We'll be able to provide for that's one. And then, of course, there's this other strain that will have military. Well, here, Henry Kissinger, I found this quotation from a book, Kissinger's last book, which he wrote with Eric Schmidt. Quote, if you imagine a war between China and the United States, you have artificial intelligence weapons. Nobody has really tested these things on a broad scale, and you can't tell exactly what will happen when AI fighter planes on both sides interact. So you are then in a world of potentially total destructiveness, close quote. And your view, how are we to understand AI?
Well, it's partially it's unknown. It can mean a lot of different things. It's poorly defined. AI can mean the next generation of computers, the last generation of computers, anything in between. I think the classic definition of AI was something that passed the Turing test and that could fool you into thinking it was a human being. In some sense, that had not been passed, but was passed by ChatGPT in late 22, early 23. Mm-hmm. And so that is a pretty significant development. And
does it feel like an inflection point as important as 1945?
I think it's on par. Let's say in the computer world, I think it's on par with the internet in the late 90s. And then there are so many different ways it can be applied that it's they're good and they're dangerous. That it's hard to know how to quite weight them all out. I would, if I had to score the Silicon Valley debate, I'm not on the Luddite side. I'm always try to be more on the pro-tech side. But if I had to score it as a debate, I do believe the effective altruists are winning the argument. And the argument is something like there are a lot of dangerous corner cases with this technology, and we should be really careful. We don't quite know how it's going to work. Maybe it doesn't become a godlike intelligence, which is some of the sort of futuristic transhumanist nonsense. But it could just be this autonomous weapon system on a drone where we want to make them autonomous because if you have a human in the loop, the human gets jammed. So there's a logic to a lot of these things where and then there are aspects of it become more first strike type weapons, and there's some kind of crazy arms race between the U.S. and communist China, and then how does this affect that arms race and change it? So there are sort of a lot of questions like that. I would say, but the larger existential risk point that I've always made is that there's a way in which the people who are worried about these existential risks, and you can also criticize them. You can criticize them for being Luddites and etc. But you can also criticize them for not being apocalyptic enough, because they're most of the time just focused on one. It's like the nuclear weapons people are still just talking about nukes, and Greta is, it's just the climate. She's not worried about AI, and she's not worried about nukes, and much less the COVID virus that was bioengineered in the Wuhan lab or something like this. And then I've often thought you should get all these people who are worried about existential risk in a room, and they have to fight it out and decide which ones really matter and how to prioritize them. And in some sense, the scary answer is there's some truth to all of them. And then if we were to do that exercise fully, what I would want to do is I would also like to throw in one more existential risk, that in my mind is as big as all these technological risks of nuclear war and runaway bioweapons and weaponized AI with autonomous weapon systems. And that's the risk of a totalitarian one world government. And again, we can, like with all the other existential risks, it's hard to know how to measure these things probabilistically because we only have one world. Once you get a totalitarian one world government, you can't reverse it. And then the reason I like to throw that risk in is that it seems to me that the implicit solution to existential risks of all the other sorts is to lean in to a sort of very non-democratic one world state that will highly regulate and stop these technologies. And if Greta gets everyone on the planet to ride a bicycle, maybe that's a way to solve climate change. But it has sort of this quality of going from the frying pan into the fire.
Right. Well, one of these existential threats to humanity, especially related to the apocalypse, he doesn't mention. So he mentions nuclear weapons. Recently just watched Oppenheimer. So Robert Oppenheimer, the Jewish communist man who developed the atomic bomb, or at least was the lead theoretician at Los Alamos, who certainly had communist connections and leanings in his life. Anyways, I thought the movie was all right. I digress. But nuclear weapons, artificial intelligence, I mean, global climate change is really one of the big existential threats. I mean, I know he was using Greta as an example, but what about mass immigration? Mass immigration is going to undermine the civil unity within societies and cause internal chaos, which we already see happening in all the first world nations. He doesn't mention that. What about the devaluing of monetary systems or the dollar? Doesn't mention, some of these policies and the concentration of wealth. I mean, he is a tech billionaire, by the way. And all this stuff is leading towards a one world government. So like I said, Peter Thiel, unlike Musk is a transhumanist, and Musk kind of gives lip service to not being a globalist, like he's described some of these globalists in nefarious terms, but all his technology and everything that he describes in the future is a unified planetary system that's spacefaring. So even Elon Musk is he is a transhumanist and he is essentially a globalist. Peter Thiel, I saw somebody in the chat label him a transhumanist. I don't know if it's totally fair to label him a transhumanist because he is very critical. He may be somebody who'd be interested in augmenting himself or taking on Neuralink. So he may or may not be. I don't know. His sort of disposition is that he's very critical of the state of democracies in the age of advanced artificial intelligence and these advanced digital technologies. He thinks that democracies can essentially be the rule of the mob, which rightfully so. And at the second half of this interview, you're going to hear him talking about how one of the things he appreciates of the biblical corpus is that they believe that the rule of the mob is madness, where the contemporary world, especially the progressive hive mind, believes that the majority is the consensus of normalcy, of legitimacy and understanding, where he is very critical of that. So some of the controversies that he's been involved with is his outright criticism of globalism, his criticism of the way democracies function in the 21st century, and his criticism of transhumanism. So, like I said, many things we disagree with concerning Peter Thiel and many contradictions within his own worldview. So he's here to present the idea that we need to take apocalyptic literature seriously, but we'll see that at no point is he explicit about the idea of Christ judging people after death. It's really his apocalyptic framework is utilizing the biblical text to orient the discussion around these technologies and what he believes will be the rise of the Antichrist, which rightfully so. But they never mention where the Antichrist is going to come from and where we would need to maybe keep our eyes on in regards to various happenings. So just wanted to throw that in there.
Right. Again, if I understand your argument, this is already clear in the way we lead our lives in this slowing of progress. Now, this, it seems to me, is worth dwelling on because it shows that the fear is real and has genuine effects in the way we all lead our lives. But we have to spend a moment or two defining it. So if I may, let me start with a quotation from you. There has been a narrow cone of progress around computers, the internet, and maybe now artificial intelligence. But if tech means producing more with less, then we should be seeing dramatic economic progress. We don't. The millennials are not dramatically better off than their boomer parents. Close quote. Okay, so you mentioned it a moment ago. Return to this notion of slowing technical progress. This great disappointment by contrast, what we see around us today, what we feel around us today by contrast with a century or so ago.
Or even late 60s.
Yes, okay.
Jetsons, Star Trek, the sort of optimistic science fiction of the 50s and 60s where, yeah, we'd have flying cars, you'd have supersonic aviation everywhere, all sorts of cures for diseases. And yes, there was an incredible amount of progress in this world of bits, much less in the world of atoms. I always think, a lot of what we do is embedded in this physical world of atoms. And so, when that slows, that's definitely felt as quite.
And you see how this the discussion of progress is always about technology and like innovation. And I understand the importance of that to some degree, but just like Elon Musk talks about being, in favor of the American worker, and then in like the next tweet, we'll talk about Tesla AI and automative driving and how all semi trucks and all trucking companies are going to be driverless. Well, that puts a lot of American workers out of business, and we can see this moving towards a UBI, universal basic income. That's not freedom. That's not freedom at all. And so Elon Musk, just like Peter Thiel, they say one thing, yet they seem like to do the other. He doesn't come out. One of the things that he doesn't address in regards to maybe the apocalyptic movement is the invasiveness of the intelligence agencies. As we highlighted with Palantir, he himself is selling your data, right? There is a company on the internet that is tracking everything you and I do and what we click on and what we look at and what we say. And he is selling that data to NSA, to the CIA, to intelligence agencies. And I would assume Mossad and other intelligence agencies around the world. That's part of the Palantir business model. So they say one thing, they do the other.
Quite stagnant. The question I always then get at, and then you get into endless debates. Is this true, or is there still a lot of progress? How would one measure it? I tend to measure it in things like these economic terms,
right,
in the way that the average millennial is having a tougher time than their boomer parents at the same point in life. And so at least there's something, even if we're not completely stuck, it's in some sense not really moving as fast as it used to. And then there's always a question of why this is,
right,
and why questions are overdetermined. And as a libertarian, I always like to say it's too regulated, and the FDA regulates the drugs too much. And if you regulated video games like the FDA regulates drugs, we'd still all just be playing Pong. And so there's a libertarian anti-regulatory thing. There is a argument that the schools aren't teaching people, and they're not teaching people to be scientists. Some of the educational institutions are broken. There's sort of an anti-liberal argument.
Some truth in all of this.
There is a Tyler Cohen argument that somehow the low-hanging fruit was picked. It was there was a bunch of easy discoveries to make, and now it's nature's cupboard is kind of bare, and you have to reach really hard to make a modest discovery. And maybe that's true. Maybe that's just sort of a self-serving excuse of baby boomers who didn't do as much as the generations that came before. But it is very striking. One way to quantify this, even if we say the rate of progress in broad fields is the same as it was 100 years ago, not that it's slow, but even if we say it's the same, if you think of PhDs, there are probably 100 times as many PhDs today as there were in, say, 1924. And so it's the same rate of progress, and the average PhD is 99% less productive than people were 100 years ago. And that doesn't seem like a very healthy scientific ecosystem. So there's some sense that that maybe it's slowed. But the overarching explanation that I've come to think is a very important one is just this idea that in some way science and technology were this trap that humanity was building for itself, that there were these apocalyptic risks, and maybe going very slow was better than racing towards Armageddon. And so we are. And I was born in 1967. I always often express frustration that I'm stuck in these office buildings or houses. They're decades old. There are all these parts of our society that feel lame, slow changing, low energy, low testosterone. Nothing is going on. And then I do wonder if we were in a Jetsons type world, we might not even be sitting here to talk about it. It might have self-destructed by that.
Right.
One of the things he's not mentioning that I think could be a factor into the lack of creativity they're talking about, the lack of true innovation, is that from a spiritual perspective, as Orthodox Christians, we believe that true creativity is inspired by God. And so making actual connections, actual inventions, things that are beneficial to humanity, I think are usually divinely inspired, despite maybe the personal opinions of those people. But as we see the progressive ethos and the degradation of our culture and the just the outright degeneracy that is running rampant, I don't think people, because of the ways in which their personal opinions and the lives in which they live are replete with dead sin, right? Sin is death, that they themselves can't be truly creative. And so we live in a world in which, I think that other parts of the world are going to outpace America purely based on, it's not that Americans themselves aren't creative, it's that the culture that we've been entrenched in is absolutely degenerate. I was recently listening to a man talking about the Bazi boys of Afghanistan, where these Muslim men hire or pay, basically it's like Desmond the Amazing. Remember that little boy who presented himself as a girl and was dancing at a gay club? Apparently his mother was present, and he was like 11 or 12 years old. Where there's a whole tradition in parts of Islam where they have harems of little boys that they have sex with. And I just think about the stagnation of that culture itself, right? The inability to actually create and inspire and build things, and the difference between America or Western civilizations in the 1800s or even the early 1900s and today is, people would have been horrified to see that stuff. But now things that are happening with the Bazi boys in Afghanistan is like, that's becoming normalized in the United States. And that demonic ethos of sin is holding everybody down, and it's destroying families. So when he's talking about progress, like, to me, progress, if we want to talk about progress in the United States, why don't we talk about living wages where a single earner, a father, a husband can earn enough money to provide for his family? That would be progress. Building strong nuclear units, that would be progress. Being able to have more children, that would be progress. Again, just as Elon Musk talks about saving the worker and then does automative AI driving that wants to displace a massive segment of the workforce, he talks about depopulation and how we have to have more babies, and isn't focused on how exactly can we raise wages. You think if he was really focused on depopulation and that Americans need to have more babies, or people around the world need to have more babies, then he would be in favor in restricting H-1B visas. He would be in favor of increasing American wages. He would be in favor of only hiring American, so that we would have more financial opportunities to build the families that we need to sustain ourselves in the future. But they don't.
Right. If you had a JFK as president on amphetamines going mano a mano with Khrushchev, I mean, it worked. In 1962, would it have worked every time?
So, by the way, someplace I didn't make a note of this, but someplace I saw you say that Facebook had 10 years of good press. In other words, 10 years of optimism before the project sort of curdled in the public mind, and that AI went from good to bad in about a month. This loss of optimism. So I have a quotation here. There are many explanations for this deceleration in tech. This is you. But the explanation, I believe, tech got scary. We're leery of it now. We're not embracing it in the way that we used to. Add to that the notion that, again, I'm thinking this through, but I'm putting it to you as a question. This isn't the way things were supposed to be when the Cold War ended.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
Russia was supposed to work. There was democracy and free markets. And instead we have this crazy man, Putin, invading Ukraine. By now there should have been at least some kind of
crazy man Putin. Yeah, he wasn't prompted by the expansion of NATO, which they promised not to do like 11 times and violated their agreements. And I'm not here to promote Putin. I am actually going to be doing a members video talking about his relationship to Israel and various Jewish power players in Russia. But to say that he's just a crazy man who decided one day to invade Ukraine, that's a total misframing. And, the gentleman who hosts Peter Robinson, who hosts the Hoover Institute, he has some really good conversations. He's been really good on bringing on people that are undermining the Darwinian narrative and highlighting that really, if you're just going to follow the science and the mathematics, macroevolution just doesn't compute. But I mean, come on, that's a total false framing.
They have rudimentary peace in the Middle East.
And who's causing the disruption in the Middle East? I mean, who's the one expanding? Who's the one that are talking about a greater Israel project? Who's the one that just expanded into Israel? Who's the one that's bombing Lebanon? Who's the one that's genociding Palestinians?
Perhaps the most striking contradiction of what we expected was that by now, China was supposed to be democratic. It was supposed to follow the pattern
The
of
Fukuyama history.
South Korea and Taiwan, where first you have economic growth, and economic growth creates expectations, including expectations of freedom, free speech, and so forth, and these countries become democratic. China was supposed to follow that. Things are not going the way they were supposed to. Add to that our own sense of polarization in this country, that this country somehow, there's just a lot of a feeling of, it's subjective. It's very difficult to get at, but it feels to me as though there's a lot of free-floating dread.
And it's hard to articulate. For
Very
example,
hard.
I'll give one example, and you can think about this what you will, but a lot of my conservative friends are very critical of Fauci and all the lockdowns and the masks and the social distancing and the vaccine that didn't really work. And on the surface level, these critiques are, I think, quite legitimate. It was not the correct protocol for some kind of flu. It was, however, roughly the right protocol if you thought it was a bioweapon. And you know, if you think it's a very dangerous, humanly engineered bioweapon, those are roughly all the kinds of things that you might do. And so.
But Peter, you just mentioned the lab leak, so you'd have to be aware that Fauci was funding the gain of function research through NIH. So talking about Fauci thinking that it was a bioweapon, he himself was creating the virus. So clearly he knew what it was, its limitations, and that it wasn't a actual bioweapon. So what are we doing here?
So
you see how they play both sides of it. So he gives legitimacy to criticisms of the jab and its ineffectiveness, doesn't mention the harm of the mRNA platform, but then goes back to say, well, Fauci did the right thing if it was a bioweapon. Well, he created the damn thing. What are you talking about? He knew it wasn't.
The kind of critique I have of Fauci is that, yeah, that's what he was scared of, I think. That's why I'd steelman him, give him the benefit of the doubt. And then the real critique is that, you know, you weren't supposed to infantilize our population and not talk about it. And that's what he was scared about. And he was so scared about it, he couldn't even talk about it. And there probably are a lot of things like this where, yeah, there is this pretty inchoate fear, but we're so scared we can't even talk about it cogently.
There's one more concept we need to flesh out, a term that you use. We'll put all the pieces of this together, although that may happen in the second part of our conversation, and that is the catechon. The term comes from the Greek for he or that, which restrains. We'll come in a moment to your analysis of the catechon through history, but first, again, the concept itself. St. Paul, in his letter to the Thessalonians, chapter 2, verses 6 to 7, and now you know what is restraining, again in Greek, catechon, and now you know what is restraining, that he may be revealed in his own time. For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who restrains, the catechon, he who now restrains will do so until he is taken out of the way. Close quote. Now, that's a very enigmatic passage. The church has never defined the term. The church fathers, the early writers and thinkers in the church, wrote about it, but tended to add that their views were speculative. So we don't have any thoroughly worked out theology of the catechon, but we do have 2,000 years ago in St. Paul, a notion of some force holding back chaos, holding back evil, holding back some force that's restraining.
Yeah, and what is that? It's pretty easy from an Orthodox worldview. It's the body of believers around the world. It's the ways in which we embody the virtues and the uncreated energies and exert them onto the world through to other people, person to person. And so it's literally the restraint is God's will by the believers upholding the second covenant and our commandments to be faithful believers. It's the church. Exactly, John of Damascus lover. It's the church. It's the Holy Spirit in us. Exactly, Mela. It's the community of believers around the world that's holding it back. It's not some tech oligarch. It's not some government structure, because that which is advancing the end times is our own degeneracy. It's our own degeneracy. It's our own sin. It's our own acquisition, acquiescing to the demands of progressive culture in the name of progress, which is really just a return to the pre-Christian world. Like,
we get to,
and here, for anybody who've never heard that term, here's catechon. It's that which withholds. The one who withholds is a biblical concept which is frequently developed into the notion of a political philosophy. And so the term is found in 2 Thessalonians, which they just read. And in eschatological context, Christians must not behave as if the day of the Lord would happen tomorrow, since the son of perdition, the Antichrist, must be revealed before. The author of 2 Thessalonians then adds that the revelation of the Antichrist is conditional upon the removal of something / someone that restrains him and prevents him being fully manifested. Verse 6 uses the neuter gender, the catechon, or to catechon, and verse 7, the masculine. Since the author of 2 Thessalonians did not explicitly mention the catecon's identity, the passage's interpretation has been a subject of dialogue and debate amongst Christian scholars. Common interpretations often identify the catechon to include the government. What? No. The church, yes. Or the Holy Spirit, yes. The church is working in the Holy Spirit's working in the church. Those go together. The last two interpretations are usually believed by Christians supporting a pre-tribulation rapture. No, it has nothing to do with pre-trib rapture. What? The Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox traditions consider that the Antichrist will come at the end of the world. The catechon, what restrains his coming, was someone or something that was known to the Thessalonians and active in their time. You know what is restraining. As the Catholic New American Bible states, traditionally, 2 Thessalonians 2:6 has been applied to the Roman Empire, and 2 Thessalonians 2:7 to the Roman Emperor as bulwarks holding back chaos. Now, this is what's interesting regarding our books that we've been going through, and thank God the Eschaton Vigil has been translating, because what does it say? What does Metropolitan Neophytos say? That, Russia, and it's going to have its own problems, but, Russia is the third Rome. Russia is the last Christian empire. I mean, point towards a Christian empire in the world. I'd love to see it. You can't point to any Western nation. You can't point to America. Can't point to Canada, Britain, France, Germany, Sweden, Netherlands. No, none of them. So interestingly, that whole Orthodox concept of Russia and Moscow being the third Rome, that is going to be tied with the Great Third World War that our prophets, our saints, and our elders have been telling us. And Russia is going to eventually be defeated, and that's what's eventually going to bring forth the chaos of Armageddon and the rising of the Antichrist. Yes, absolutely. The Orthodox Church is the last line of defense. It is the catechon. They're the body of believers, the Holy Spirit working in us, the image of Christ within us, our preservation and our diligence in continuing our connection and our relationship with the Holy Trinity. That is what's restraining. This is why when we read these eschatological visions, they tell us that as people repent, and that's true for even non-Orthodox, but as more people repent, especially the Orthodox Christians, as more people come to the Orthodox Church, we can push the end times away. Now, God already knows the beginning of the end because God's outside history. He's outside space and time. So to God's perspective, it's a linear point in which he's watching. We are somewhere, towards the end of the timeline, I believe, but we don't know the time or the date, because as people repent, as people embody Christ, as people are filled and inspired by the Spirit, we can push that end times back. That is the catechon.
Cardinal Newman, writing in the 19th century, Cardinal Newman, great thinker and theologian, in my judgment, the best prose stylist of the whole century in English. Cardinal Newman writes, "We know from prophecy that the present framework of society and government is that which withholdeth." Again, the catechon. So he identifies it with a framework of society and government. All right. That's my little effort to present the concept of the catechon. You use that concept how? You identify the catechon through history. Yeah, as you said, it's a rather mysterious concept. You can identify it with the good aspects of the Roman Empire, certain political aspects of the Roman Catholic Church, individuals, institutions that somehow
are trying to hold this runaway chaos in check. I don't think it's purely reactionary. You can think of Metternich post-Napoleon as sort of catacontic, but he's also modernizing. It is a thing of history, though, and so there are ways to do it that can be good for a time, that will not necessarily work for all times. But I would always maybe go back to the apocalyptic specter would be Antichrist or Armageddon, and I think there is a lot in this runaway science technology that's pushing us towards something like Armageddon, and then there is the natural pushback on this is we will avoid Armageddon by having a one world state that has real teeth, real power, and the biblical term for that is the Antichrist, and the Christian intuition I have is I don't want Antichrist, I don't want Armageddon. I would like to find some narrow path between these two where we can avoid both, and then certainly there are ways that you defer it if you can. You try to do new things. I don't think it's a purely reactionary thing.
Okay.
It's not a pure Benedictine option where you just retreat into a monastery or something like that. I think that's the most accelerationist thing possible.
You quit resisting.
You quit. It sort of clears the field. It's like the Lord Acton line: "All that is necessary for evil to triumph is that good men do nothing." And so this is where I'm always, it can be.
Notice the words "good men," Peter. What does good men mean? And so and this is where, as Orthodox Christians, we can agree to some extent. Now, the monastics are on the front line of the spiritual battle. We cannot fight. There is no catacon fully without the monastic dimension of our church and our faith. At the same time, yes, all the lay men, we have a responsibility. I've talked about this with multiple priests on the channel. We have a responsibility to be Christ in the world. And so, especially if you're a married man and you have children, you can't just flee to a monastery. You have to be in the world. But what does it mean for good men to do nothing? That means to allow sin and evil to be pervasive, not to sit and talk about, AI. Yeah, I talk about technology and stuff, but that is not what's stopping, the fulfillment of Armageddon and the Antichrist. It's by me and my wife and the people around me trying to become better people, more in the image of Christ, more in the image and likeness of Christ.
The Benedictine option can be good for personal sanctification, but to the extent we're talking about society,
our friend Rod Dreher wrote a book about this. The idea of going to the idea is that Christians simply drop out. Society is going in the wrong direction, and Christians simply drop out. That's roughly.
And I cannot. I don't want to argue with him on the level of personal sanctification or people saving their souls. My political, social intuition is that it's the height of irresponsibility, because that is just in effect hitting the accelerator towards the Antichrist Armageddon.
Okay, let's finish this first part of our conversation with more on the Antichrist. Let me take a moment to set this up, if I may. A few passages from Scripture. Daniel chapter 7. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream. There before me was a beast, fearful, terrifying, very strong. It had great iron teeth, and it ate its victims and trampled their remains underfoot. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, we're back to St. Paul. He's writing about the end times. It cannot happen until there has appeared the wicked one, the lost one, the enemy who raises himself above every object of worship and flaunts the claim that he is God. Revelation chapter 13. Then I saw a beast emerge from the sea, and they prostrated themselves in front of the beast, saying, "Who can compare with the beast? Who can fight against it?" And all the people of the world will worship it. Close quote. There are people who take all of this seriously. We've already quoted René Girard. We've already quoted Cardinal Newman. But Daniel dates from the Iron Age. Thessalonians and Revelation are 2,000 years old. Contemporary society, we sit here in Stanford University, contemporary society all but ignores these texts or derides them as of interest only to snake handlers, as I mentioned, snake handlers in Kentucky hollers. You are no snake handler. Well, you take this stuff.
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Not that you're aware of, not that I'm aware of. So we'll come to how the Antichrist might arise, what we must do to people. We'll come to that in our second conversation. But the first thing I want to establish is, why do you take this seriously?
Well, again, one can take it seriously without taking it completely literally.
Mm-hmm.
But just let me maybe defend Daniel, the Old Testament prophet. And if you contrast it with, let's say, a Greco-Roman understanding of history, Thucydides, Herodotus. Thucydides writes the account of the Peloponnesian Wars between Athens and Sparta, and it has a timeless and eternal character. It's the rising power against the existing power. Athens is the rising power, and the Thucydides trap is when this repeats itself with Wilhelmine Germany against Britain in 1914, or perhaps today China against the U.S. It's timeless and eternal. Particulars don't matter. The speeches people give don't matter. Thucydides makes them up, and it's sort of like a natural cyclical kind of a view of history, or one where there is no specific history. And then by contrast, I do not think it's an exaggeration to say something like Daniel was the first historian, where it is the things that matter are one time and world historical. And there was a creation, there's a fall, there's a Mosaic revelation.
History is going someplace.
It's going somewhere, and the choices people make matter.
And what he's trying to say is that he doesn't believe in sort of cyclical narratives. The reason why biblical prophecy, whether it be the book of Daniel or the book of Revelation, is so important is because it's ascribing a linear narrative to history. And so he's talking about Thucydides and the Peloponnesian War being a sort of narrative of the battle of, the powerful versus the weak, and that this is a sort of cyclical pattern of history. History rhymes, history repeats, but biblical passages, biblical prophecy has a linear dimension to it. And to that extent, I agree with the point he's making. Now, somebody asked, why is Peter Thiel giving a biblical lecture? That's why we're watching this, is because of the sort of snake-tongued dimension of these techno oligarchs of Silicon Valley, and how, I began really talking about Elon Musk, but Peter Thiel is certainly also presenting himself as some sort of adjacent right-wing, maybe not right-wing, but certainly a Trump-supporting conservative tech billionaire. And he is in this interview more recently presenting himself as a sort of concerned Christian about the end times and how modern technology is progressing towards the Armageddon and the Antichrist, and that he wants to give voice to this. So again, that's why I think this is interesting and important to talk about, is to see the sort of double-tongued speech of people like Musk and Peter Thiel.
And some of the choices matter in a very, very big way, and there's a way that Christ's ministry and death and resurrection was a part of history, or a hinge moment of history, and then there are ways it continues, and I think that's sort of a feel for history, and something like Hegel is just a pale shadow of the Judeo-Christian sense of history. You could say again, you have to qualify this very carefully, but you could say that the New Testament God is the first progressive, because the new supersedes the old. And so it's the first time that there is something new just by virtue of it being new. There's something new that comes in through history. You have to, all these ways you have to qualify. If you go too progressive, you get to something like, Marcion or Marx. If you're, but if you say it's all in the Old Testament, that's somehow not quite right either.
You see, it's almost like Peter Thiel venerates innovation. And so he is so focused, sort of venerating Hegel as somebody who sort of has perceived the pattern of history. Hegel's dialectic was about sort of the subjective and the objective being a sort of unified Geist, the spirit, and that this is working in a dialectical manner to fully manifest itself in the logos at the end of history. Now, Hegel was not a biblical literalist. He believed that the knowledge that people had, or through revealed scripture, was limited to him at that point, before the Napoleonic invasion. But you see, Peter Thiel, it's like he perceives the end times, Armageddon and the Antichrist, as like some possibilities that scripture talks about. And somehow we can progressively innovate ourselves and move in between these two catastrophes, as opposed to an objective fact of the end of history. And so at some point it's going to happen. It's not something that we can sort of maneuver and navigate around, which kind of feels like the way that he describes it.
So you take it seriously because you don't believe history is Groundhog Day. It doesn't happen over and over and over again. This cyclical aspect, the eternal recurrence, in some fundamental way, the meaninglessness of it. History is going someplace, and if it's going someplace, that means there will be an endpoint.
and there are important things that will happen that are different from things that happened in the past, and so to have a and so if we want to have a feel for our times, for what is going on in the world in the early 21st century, there are ways we can try to reference it to the past. You could say, there's some parallel between the decline of the United States and the fall of the Roman Empire. But but the differences are surely really important. It's happening in a world of nuclear weapons and instantaneous communication, and it's happening in a very post-Christian or hyper-Christian world, not in a pagan world. And somehow the classical approaches to history always downplay the things that are one-time, unique, world historical. And I think we should take our bearings more from that.
Peter Thiel, thank you.
Okay, so now let's skip over to part 2 here. Where's part 2? Let's see. There we go.
One of the most sophisticated men in America, brilliant, urbane, and immensely.
Yeah, I totally agree with Dernan here that it feels like, again, whatever sort of progressive liberal Christianity that Peter Thiel associates himself with, clearly it's okay with sexual sin. That's not a problem because, as he said, he's a very proud gay man. And we haven't heard repentance. We hadn't heard virtue. We hadn't heard becoming like Christ at all in this conversation of Christianity, the Antichrist, and the end times. What we heard was that Jesus Christ was the first progressive because the second covenant superseded the first covenant, and that was like the first ultimate innovation. And therefore, we need to take this sort of lens of innovation as the methods in which we sort of navigate and find the narrow path between Armageddon and the Antichrist. This is just ridiculous. But I'm going to address a few super chats real quick before we dive into part 2 here. So smash that like for everybody who's here. Thank you so much for being here. If you'd like to send in a question, comment, or support my work and channel, please do so using Streamlabs, Dono Chat, or YouTube. And if you're feeling generous, again, a major thank you to David James Flood for gifting 10 COTEL Crew memberships. Please give some COTEL Crew memberships. As I said, I'm going to post some of my members-only content on YouTube now for members only, just to incentivize people to become YouTube members. But let me check the Dono Chat real quick. Jay Hamza throws in $15, and he says, when left to our own devices, mankind will destroy himself. True. People make poor decisions and blatantly lie to make excuses for their behavior. Christians are either full on for Jesus or not. You can't have the world and Jesus. Amen. You can't worship Mammon and God at the same time. Thank you so much, Jay Hamza. Truly appreciate your support, brother. Thank you very much. And over on Streamlabs, we had a couple super chats sent in. Last one came from Henry Ford sympathizer, throws in $1 and says, someone needs to resurrect the Dearborn Independent. Yeah, true. And George throws in $3 and says, have you read any of David Irving's books? Courageous Man. Yes, I'm very familiar with David Irving's work. So thank you very much, George. And thank you, Henry Ford sympathizer. Do appreciate that. And so, as I said, if you guys have any questions or comments or want to show some love for the work and channel, please send in a super chat. And anything on YouTube, Streamlabs, or Dono Chat would greatly appreciate it.
Successful entrepreneur, one of the most sophisticated men in America, taking ancient prophecies seriously. Peter Thiel on Uncommon Knowledge now. Welcome to Uncommon Knowledge. I'm Peter Robinson. Peter Thiel received his undergraduate and law degrees here at Stanford. He co-founded PayPal, became the first outside investor in Facebook, and co-founded Palantir, and remains an important tech investor. He has also established himself as a remarkable thinker. A self-described contrarian, Peter Thiel has never proven more contrary than in taking seriously the biblical framework for probing the meaning of history and what ancient prophecies might help us to think, to understand about our predicament today. I should note that although viewers will find this second conversation interesting enough on its own, I'm sure of that, the conversation may prove even more striking if they've already watched our first conversation, which you'll be able to find on YouTube. Peter, welcome back. The Antichrist. Cardinal Newman, the great 19th century author and theologian, writes that it is the duty, that's a quote from Newman, the duty of believers quote, ever to be watching for the end times, quote, and above all, to keep in mind the great and awful sign of which St. Paul speaks to the Thessalonians, the emergence of, quote, the very image of Satan, the fearful and hateful Antichrist, close quote. As I understand your argument, you hold, one, that the prophecy of an Antichrist in one way or another remains valid, or at least useful. Two, that it remains our duty, again, Cardinal Newman's word, duty, to watch for the signs that it might emerge. And three, that duty is now almost entirely neglected and forgotten. Fair?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Tell us, go ahead.
I mean, yeah, there's so many, there's so many different things one can say about it. I think it was Ivan Illich who said that in the time before Christ, there were many forerunners to Christ. In the time after Christ, there'll be many forerunners of the Antichrist. So in some sense, it's a type. So Nero was a type of the Antichrist, or maybe Napoleon was a type of the Antichrist. And it's sort of it's someone which aspires for world domination, creation of the sort of one world state. In some ways, Alexander the Great was sort of a pre-Christ prototype of the Antichrist. It's sort of very parallel to Christ. They both die at 33. Alexander conquers the world. Christ saves it. So sort of a compare and contrast. So, but in some sense, the Antichrist as an idea is something that really comes into being in the world after Christ. And so there's a lot of things about it that are mysterious. In some ways, the Antichrist copies Christ. The Antichrist pretends to be greater than Christ, hyper-Christian, ultra-Christian, and then maybe only ultimately, deeply anti-Christian. Okay.
So you
and then
go ahead.
And then you can think of it as a system, where maybe communism is a one world system. So it can be an ideology or a system. And then of course you can also think of it as Newman did, where it's sort of the final dictator of the one world state, where it's still, you stress it more as a person. You can think of it as a type, a system, a person. It has something to do in this post-Christian. It's something that's sort of a possibility in this post-Christian world. It is in some ways, and it's related to Christ in a very complicated way. So the theological question you can always ask, is it possible to be too Christian? And in theory, no, but in practice, if you think you're more Christian than Christ, you're in trouble.
From a prophecy 2,000 years old to our own times, you draw attention to two fictional portrayals of an Antichrist from about a century ago. Vladimir Soloviev, a Russian mystic, in 1900 wrote a book or a novella, A Short Tale of the Antichrist, and then a 1905 novel by a Roman Catholic English priest called Robert Hugh Benson, and the novel is Lord of the World. In both of these fictional accounts, the Antichrist emerges as a charismatic figure, kind of Superman. Soloviev, quote, "There was a remarkable person, many called him a Superman. He believed in God, but in the depths of his soul, he preferred himself." In Benson, the Antichrist is portrayed again as a charismatic figure. He becomes president of Europe. Then in some mysterious way, he's elected president of the world. But in both of those fictional...
They never mentioned Jerusalem, where the Antichrist is going to rule as one world government. Interesting.
Accounts of a century ago, there's a plot hole. We're not given the mechanism by which this strange charismatic figure achieves dominance. And your argument is, again, if I understand it correctly, that now, today, a century after Soloviev and Robert Hugh Benson, we can understand a mechanism. We could imagine a mechanism by which such a figure might emerge.
Yeah, by the way, those are both fantastic books. I have a preference for the Soloviev one, but Benson and Soloviev are both terrific books. There are all these extraordinary ways that they still resonate 100 years later. So, Soloviev envisions the United States of Europe, so sort of a European Union, the sort of super state. In Benson, the Antichrist is a Jewish socialist senator from Vermont. And so I was a little bit...
Well, that's a little bit closer on point. We know communism, socialism sort of communism light, and a Jewish senator from Vermont sounds a little like Bernie Sanders, but I don't think he's the one. I think he's a little too old. But we see at least an inkling at who exactly is the Antichrist.
Nervous about Bernie Sanders, but so there are
too much on the nose.
There sort of are elements of them where.
By the way, you're not quite the only person. I noticed in reading up on this, Benedict XVI several times mentioned approvingly the Robert Hugh Benson book, and Pope Francis over and over again has referred to it. So, two popes and Peter Thiel.
So there's sort of all sorts of parts of it where they have this feeling being near great literature, but the plot hole is sort of like how does a sort of world takeover actually happen? And it's kind of not a deus ex machina, but it's like a daemonium ex machina. It's like the Antichrist just gives these hypnotic speeches where nobody can remember a word, and then sort of just swindles people's souls out of them, and they submit to this totalitarian state or something like this. And I think if we were to speculate on how to solve that plot hole, we have an answer in the world after 1945. That people are in 1900, early 20th century, people were not yet scared of apocalyptic weapons. They could not imagine, anything of the scale that we'd have by the second half of the 20th century. And so the Antichrist takes over by talking about Armageddon.
Let's show this a brief video, which we'll edit into the show, of course.
One world or none.
Exactly.
There is no secret. When a neutron strikes, the atom is split. These neutrons split other atoms. The result is atomic energy. So the people of the world use this energy for the destruction or the betterment of mankind.
So that's a 1946 video. Everything about it, the images, the tension in the narrator's voice, the background music, is to be scary. The choice is this or one world. That dates from 1946, as I said, but here's a quotation from just a few years ago. It's from a paper titled The Vulnerable World Hypothesis by the very hip techno-philosopher Nick Bostrom. Quote, "What is needed to solve problems that involve challenges..."
And Nick Bostrom, by the way, is a transhumanist philosopher out of Oxford, who has talked about some of the deleterious potentialities of advanced artificial intelligence, gene editing, and stuff like that, but ultimately believes if we're going to rescue humanity and have a promising future, we have to go along and follow through with it. So just so you know who they're quoting right here.
Of international coordination, challenges such as nukes, pandemic dangers, techno threats. What is needed is effective global governance.
And this is why transhumanism is so often linked to globalism and creating a one world government, because that's the only way that they could, in their terms, as Peter Thiel rightfully criticizes, this is their argumentation. And the only way that we can limit the advance of artificial intelligence or limit artificial intelligence from killing all humanity, because if we don't have a one world government and China gets, they create the sentient AI, or Russia creates the sentient AI, then it may just go ahead and kill people in different parts of the world or something. Therefore, we need to create a one world government. And, Project Bluebeam, all these UFO conspiracies about creating a sort of extraterrestrial threat so that we have to form a sort of military unified one world response. All this falls into the same boat.
Franklin Roosevelt designed the United Nations to serve in some way as a kind of world parliament after the end of the Second World War. The United Nations didn't work, but maybe FDR was just ahead of his time.
Yeah, well, it is the same. This is the plot hole in Soloviev and Benson, and it's an interesting question. What is the difference between that? We have this very secular language, one world or none, and then there's the sort of overly religious question, Antichrist or Armageddon, and aren't they? And my thesis, they're somehow the same. And the different, if I had to say what the difference between those two ways of asking the questions are, is Antichrist or Armageddon, it sounds like they're both bad options. And that way of asking the question, it pushes us to find a third way and not to just steer from one into the other. One world or none. Those sound like they're exclusive, but they're also exhaustive possibilities. And since we don't want to have no world, we want the one world.
Harvard Law School, Adrian Vermeule wants big government. He has already argued for continent-wide government, and which would represent a step toward global governance. And his view is that if the government is based on some understanding of Christian ethics, and you make sure that it reflects subsidiarity, the principle that problems should be solved by the smallest unit possible, then big government international coordinate. This is a good thing, not a bad thing. You just don't buy that.
I do not buy it. I think I'm much more in the Lord Acton camp that power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and it would be a power with no check. There would be no outside left. It would be in a sense, it would be the biggest crowd. It would be the biggest bubble. Probably a place where the Bible differs from Enlightenment rationality. Enlightenment rationality believes in the wisdom of crowds. Yes. The Bible believes in the madness of crowds, and if you have a world state that's in some sense the largest crowd, it's the whole humanity closing in on
Global
itself.
mob.
It's a global mob.
And that's a point that I actually appreciated that he made in regards to Enlightenment rationality believes in the wisdom of crowds, democracy, majority dominates, rule of the majority, rule of the mass, versus the biblical wisdom of that crowds, masses often include madness. And this has to do with the importance of the person, the personhood of individuals and the choices that they make. The Bible is highlighting that when people are absorbed into a collective mass, they lose the image of God in them. They lose the person of who they are. And this is what is so distinctive in the church is we come together as persons, not losing our individuality in relationship to our ultimate personhood in Jesus Christ through the Eucharist, through the sacraments. And so that was a point that I will give Peter. I think that is a yeah. People are asking, yes, he's gay. People keep asking if he's gay. Yes, Peter Thiel is gay. But I would argue that that point that he makes is actually very astute and highlights why we have to be very cautious of these, the movements of the masses, the majority of groups and groupthink, because often it's moving us away towards that which has been told to us by Christ.
Mob. So there sort of are these intuitions that probably adjacent ideas about the fallen nature of man and original sin that make me nervous about the one world state. Subsidiarity is good in theory and practice. The devil is in the details, and if too much of the power has to be at the top level. If you absolutize things like climate change or nuclear weapons control or things like this, that has to all be at the top echelon. It's not going to be decided by the city of Palo Alto or by some kind of a subsidiary layer. I have sort of more prosaic intuitions where, I sort of wonder what would be the marginal tax rates in a one world state where people couldn't move, and I suspect they would be quite high. It sort of would be like East Germany with no escape, and
you could move to Texas or Florida and get a zero income tax rate.
And then I think California would push them higher, and the U.S. would push them higher, and the limit of that seems quite bad. And then, of course, if you go down the Boston argument, you need effective global government and extremely effective global policing. And so, if you think about things like AI technology, it's just we have to stop anyone from programming the AI, and so you have to, in some sense, monitor every keystroke everywhere. So, sort of something that's powerful enough to control the whole world.
So this goes back to your argument in the first part of this conversation, that for the first time in history, we can actually imagine human beings destroying the world. That's quite a plot. Now, also, we have the mechanisms that would make world government a gigantic global surveillance state is plausible.
That seems plausible too. And then I think, again, to come back to the Soloviev-Benson plot hole, on its own, they both seem not that desirable. Why would we have a crazy surveillance state? Why would we, why would we do this? But if you're scared enough of these things, that's the weapon. And this is sort of where my speculative thesis is that if the Antichrist were to come to power, it would be by talking about Armageddon all the time. And
Peter Thiel, the Antichrist would talk about Armageddon all the time. He'd scare people and then offer to save them.
It's the 1 Thessalonians 5:3. The slogan of the Antichrist is peace and safety, and so, which is nothing wrong with peace and safety, but you have to sort of imagine that it resonates very differently in a world where the stakes are so absolute, where the stakes are so extreme, where the alternative to peace and safety is, Armageddon and the destruction of all things. And then that's where peace and safety gets you way more than it would have in 1750.
Renee.
But the thing about the offering peace and safety is that the Antichrist will emerge after a war of chaos, famine, monetary collapse, internal chaos within societies. And that's why he will be offering this peace and safety, due to the actual chaotic environments that people will reside in. It's not just some rhetoric that people are going to bow down and worship the Antichrist without any sort of being prompted to by external factors, that the society itself, the mark of the beast, to participate in commerce, the total collapse of everything around us. This is why people will yearn for a worldly savior in the Antichrist. He doesn't mention that.
Hey, Rene Girard, in I Saw Satan Fall Like Lightning, one of his books, the Antichrist boasts of bringing to human beings the peace and tolerance that Christianity promised, but has failed to deliver?
Yeah, there are probably, I think there are all these elements where it's downstream from Christianity. You can think of, the poor shall inherit the earth, Sermon on the Mount. Marxist theory is we're going to be more Christian, we're going to accelerate it, we're going to bring it about faster. So there is, the Antichrist probably presents as a great humanitarian, as a great, it's redistributive, it's as an extremely great philanthropist, as an effective altruist, all of those kinds of things. And these things are not, simply anti-Christian, but it is always when they get overly combined with state power that something is very wrong. There are sort of ways Christ wants to unify the world. You have the parable of the Good Samaritan, where you should take care of people even if you're not related to them, and it's good to act like the Good Samaritan and to take care of people not just in your family or tribe or country, but then if you force everyone to be a Good Samaritan and you force a borderless world, it's somehow adjacent. Somehow it's an intensification, but it's somehow also very much the opposite.
Okay, Scylla and Charybdis, and we come here. It'll take me another moment to set this up, but we come here. We depart now from Peter Thiel's analysis, and we come to Peter Thiel's exhortation. What needs to be done? Well, step or two to complete the analysis, and then it leads to what needs to be done. The questions at least we need to be asking. Scylla and Charybdis. Odysseus is on his way home, and he has to sail past two sea monsters. Scylla is a six-headed monster who will devour sailors, and Charybdis is a whirlpool that swallows ships whole and then spits them back out. And of course, they stand for sort of the horns of a dilemma. That's the way Scylla and Charybdis get used. The phrase. Peter Thiel, everyone is worried about the Scylla of Armageddon. Nukes, pandemics, AI. Everyone is worried about the Scylla of Armageddon. We're not worried enough about the Charybdis of one world government, the Antichrist. Explain.
This just seems obviously correct. It's like if you think about the language that we've been using in this program, it's Armageddon is not that taboo. You can just talk about that by referencing the newspapers.
Right.
We are sleepwalking into Armageddon, maybe not in the Ukraine or the Middle East, but maybe with Taiwan and China. So there are all these.
Everybody feels the dread.
We can use Armageddon, and maybe it's literal and maybe it's metaphorical, but that's totally acceptable. So that tells you that's not the thing that's taboo. Antichrist is like, wow, what planet are you from?
Right.
And so that tells me that the existential risks are very selective of the sort that we've given, and the fears about a one world state are downplayed because they are the solution to the other ones. That is the self-governing, politically atheist, humans governing themselves solution to Armageddon is, it's what Bostrom says. It's it's effective world government with extremely effective policing to stop, dangerous technologies from being developed and to force people to, not have too diverse a set of views, because the diversity of views is what's going to push some scientists to develop technologies they shouldn't be developing. And so,
again, the irony of all this is his company Palantir. So he is literally has sort of rap sheets on everybody who is on the internet that they can get digital footprints of. And he is selling that data. And then he's talking about a one world government that is totally invasive in policing people around the world. Well, who do you think's doing the policing? The people you're selling your data to, bro. What are you talking about?
We're just so grooved to the Antichrist solution. We don't worry about it because it is actually, it presents itself as the solution to all these others. And then my intuition is that what that tells me is that we should worry about both. But if you had to prioritize them, you should be way more worried about the Antichrist because no one's worried about it. And of course, don't know how literally one should take these biblical accounts, but in the biblical accounts, the Antichrist comes first because people are more scared of Armageddon than the Antichrist, perhaps. The Antichrist comes first. It doesn't quite work. The one world state doesn't work. It still goes haywire. Maybe you have a fantastic communist government, but somehow the AI still goes mad and you still get to Armageddon. But that's what comes first.
Right. As I understand it, you see three possibilities here. Now we begin to move toward what is to be done. One is to end globalization outright, end world trade, but that would produce a dramatical, all but unthinkable drop in living standards. So end globalization, but that's all but unthinkable. Two, permit globalization to continue in an unfettered manner, but that would be likely to lead to world government. Three, Permit globalization to continue, but only in a permissible, good, salutary way. Limit it, tame it, make sure it never supplants nation states. Quote, Peter Thiel, our only chance of achieving good globalization is to be critical of globalization, to recognize the narrowness of the path. Peter?
Well, the way I would frame that is, it's certainly hard to see how things can work if we completely deglobalize. If you go back to this world that's completely separated and with no trade, no flow of ideas between different parts of the world, and so
eliminate the internet and container shipping, and you've got it.
I don't think that's easier said than done.
Yes,
it's easier said than done, and but then it's precisely because we can't simply turn the clock back on all globalization that we end up having what I would call this Stockholm syndrome. And is globalization more good than bad? Is it just sort of a corrupt racket where, I don't know, North Korea exports plutonium and counterfeit $100 bills and imports, I don't know, Swedish prostitutes and whiskey or whatever they import. And so if you have this view that no globalization can't be an option, you'll have too Panglossian view of globalization. And this is my critique of the Fukuyama, Clinton, Bush, WTO,
the New World Order, free trade. It
was always abstracted. Everything takes care of itself. It will all work out for the best. And at a minimum, you need to just always think there are so many bad forms of globalization. Our only chance of getting to a good one is to realize how tough it is. Maybe we should have trade treaties. We should negotiate them. They should always be negotiated by people who don't believe in free trade. If you have someone who believes in free trades, we don't need to pay attention to the details. It always will work out for the best. So yes, there's a way. I think one should try to negotiate these treaties, but you always want someone on your side who deeply doesn't believe in it and who is going to hold out for all sorts of terms. And that's sort of how we might get our way through. But yeah, I think we had and then all these versions of this. I think there's the strange chimerica, the sort of mythical fusion of China and America that was maybe 28 years from Bush 41 to Obama, from something like 88 to 2016. And yeah, we don't want to go to a nuclear war with China. I don't want to go to a major war, but it's a very complicated way to manage this relationship. And simply the Panglossian intuitions that everything will automatically work out probably don't quite make it. There's always a book, I like to reference from 1910, The Great Illusion by Norman Angell. This is a pre-World War I book, and it's
1910, right.
And it is the world is connected through trade and finance. That there cannot be a world war because it would just destroy more than it would create. And it was a massive bestseller in 1910. Angell actually gets a Nobel Peace Prize for the book in 1933, even though it was sort of spectacularly wrong. But one of the lines in it was, Britain going to war with Germany makes as much sense as London invading Hertfordshire, the adjacent county to London. And it was just the stock market would go down more. You couldn't do this, and everyone would lose. And yet that happened. And so the sort of glib globalization, I think, is not going to work. And we need to just ask a relentless number of hard questions about it.
Got it. So
if I understand him correctly, based on everything he just said, he's very critical of globalization, though he's not entirely against it. He thinks we have to have robust conversations of critical assessment of the naive understandings of the globalist framework, but that in a sense, it sounds like he feels it's inevitable. Did you guys pick up on that? Was that kind of what you guys took of it? He says the only way to stop or limit globalization is to be incredibly critical of it, yet based on that original quote, where was it? Sounded like it's not going to stop it. Yeah, our only chance of achieving good globalization. So he's in favor of good globalization, and that means we have to be very critical of globalization so we can have robust conversations of critical understandings. No. How about no globalization? How about a planet of nation states that are filled with people indigenous to those places that have a place to thrive and build families and live? That is progress. That is the vision of a nationalist framework. That's the only thing that's going to bring ultimate harmony. and Agenda 21 and flooding the first world with third world. That is part of the agenda to bring forth the globalist government that he's talking about.
But then, yeah, it's like always in the details. I think we have to find some way to talk about these technologies, where the technologies are dangerous, but it's probably, in some sense, it's even more dangerous not to do them. It's even more dangerous to have a society where there's zero growth. If we go full on with the Club of Rome, limits to growth, we have this fully Luddite program. That, again, my intuition is that will end very badly politically. It's going to be a zero-sum, nasty Malthusian society, and it will push towards something that's much more autocratic, much more totalitarian, because the pie won't grow. People will be much nastier.
So what you're asking for, well, okay, so let me ask what you're.
The pie isn't growing now. Even with the highest GDP in U.S. history, the pie is getting smaller. And this comes to one of the criticisms levied at Peter Thiel is monopolistic practices. Now, how true it is, I don't know the ins and outs of the market in which Palantir is competing with other private firms or private companies. But one of the criticisms about Peter Thiel and his libertarianism is that he himself, through PayPal and Palantir, have essentially monopolized their own piece of the economic pie, if you will. And I don't see this benefiting the average person in any part of the world. Not at all. So again, I'm not understanding the connection here.
We're asking for a little bit here.
Because we can see that as GDP rises, that does not increase the well-being of any individual within the nation state that rises the GDP. I don't get it.
You said at the Cambridge Union earlier this year that you were going to stay out of politics this time. So I won't ask you about politics exactly, but you were arguing that we should be supporting candidates.
Oh yeah, Wicked Wally. Shout out to you, Wicked Wally. God bless you and your lady. He says, I don't know why we all can't see it. My veil of ignorance is lifted. To fix globalization, we're going to need tons of globalization. Just critical, robust conversation about it. The logic is flawless. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So the way that we prevent bad globalization is being critical so that we get good globalization.
Who put America first? Is that roughly where we're going here? Skeptics of free trade, this all tends toward one side of the political argument. Or are you simply, or are you, is this an exhortation? Are you aiming this at universities and simply calling for renewed, far more practical debate, far more alive to the dangers that we now face, that have never been faced by humanity before?
Well, my starting answer for all these things is always, surely the first step is to think about these things really hard and
ask the questions that
are not being asked. Maybe the way I framed them.
It reminds me of the Dave Rubin, like, we're having important conversations where, he has people like Sam Harris and Ben Shapiro on, and we're having the conversations that nobody's having. So we have to, Peter Thiel's case, we just have to think really hard about it. He's like, so you're in favor of like America first? Well, I think these are the first priority is to really think about these questions. What? That's not doing. I mean, it's very obvious what people need for the betterment and flourishing of them and their families. Yeah, first person cue. It's conversations about conversations. That's how we save the world.
Are too dramatic, but if that's what it takes for us to ask these questions, that's better than being stuck in I don't know, in some weird silly Groundhog Day game. I think my intuition is the stakes are very high. The political stakes are high because there are a lot of crazy things that can happen. It's hard to evaluate, which of these candidates are better. But that's, it's not just about the price of eggs or marginal inflation rates or things like this. It is about maintaining freedom in the U.S. and also not sleepwalking to Armageddon.
Peter, I have a confession to make. In my mind, when you first started talking about Scylla and Charybdis, this analysis, I wronged you. I thought to myself, this is Peter being Peter. He loves building intellectual models. He has the kind of mind that goes in that direction. Hegel, Weber, Strauss. Reality is of second.
So he just mentioned some of the more important German intellectuals of the last 300 years. But Peter Thiel is definitely in this group. What? Come on, man.
Order. The real importance here is the model, the intellectual model, because you enjoy it for its own sake. And I do think you do have a mind that looks for.
What is his model? I have yet to find a coherent intellectual model that he's working from.
Structures and frameworks. All right. But here, then I come across this passage from our old friend Rene. This is Rene Girard in 2009. The more probable the apocalypse becomes, the less we talk about it. Therefore, we have to awaken our sleeping consciences. And I thought, this is not a game for Peter. You are taking, this is serious to you. You believe that you see questions that need to be asked that are not being asked. And you are trying to awaken our sleeping consciences. Will you accept that compliment?
I'll take that.
And you'll accept that
I'll take that.
confession? All right. So Peter Thiel, I'm quoting you now. What I hope to retrieve is a sense of the stakes, of the urgency of the question. The stakes are really, really high. It seems very dangerous that we're at a place where so few people are concerned about the Antichrist. Close quote.
Yeah, it's all the reasons we've gone through.
Okay. What kind of response have you been getting? By the way, you haven't written a book. I understand you're thinking about a book on this, but you haven't written it yet. You're still going through various iterations, talking to small groups of people. I heard you give a series of talks on this. What has the response been?
It's certainly it takes a while for people to get into the frame, and then people are extremely engaged, and it's not like the anxiety doesn't exist. It's not like people think everything is quite as normal as it should be. I think the point of it is not to be, in some sense, defeatist. This is just inscribed in the future. The point of it is to start thinking about what can be done. What some of the choices are, and Antichrist or Armageddon. That framing, we can envision a third way.
Right.
One world or none. That's pretty hard to envision a third way, and so that's where I think the biblical language, it sounds crazier, but it's actually more hopeful. One world or none. Those are the two options if you're a political atheist.
Right.
We have human self-government or human self-destruction, and then it's a choice of two incredible evils, and then I think I don't think these things are, I'm not a Calvinist. I don't think these things are determined or predestined.
Mm-hmm.
I always believe there's a space for human agency for us to shape the history, and the first step has to be not to just bury our heads in the sand or whatever the equivalent is.
So the United States, two quotations, Ronald Reagan. It's always been my belief that by a divine plan, this nation was placed between the two oceans to be sought out and found by those with a special brand of courage and love of freedom, close quote. So could it be that the United States is itself a catechon, a restrainer, a force that by its economic power...
Give me a how could any conservative or self-confessing Christian believe that America is the one that's the catechon, that's pushing and resisting and withholding the emergence of the Antichrist? What are you talking about? We are the military wing of Israel. Our biggest export is sexual degeneracy and Hollywood films. What are you talking about?
Power and military might and the example it sets to the world.
It's example of fighting wars on behalf of Israel and killing innocent people? What?
Holds back the chaos. I would like to believe that. You and I aren't that far apart in age. We both grew up when the country still worked under Reagan. Here's a second quotation. This is Peter Thiel, quote, "One obvious candidate for the Antichrist is the United States."
Well, I think the U.S.
Answer that without breaking my heart, please.
I think the U.S. is a natural candidate for both. And certainly the Cold War history, 49 to 89, I think Christian democracy was catacontic.
The United States itself can't be the Antichrist because the United States is not a person. It's an abstraction of a collective agency of the government itself. So in regard, could the Antichrist spirit being utilized the United States? Absolutely. And I don't mean this as just the American people. I think there's a distinction here between Americans and the U.S. federal government. And the U.S. federal government has been on the wrong side of history it seems to be quite often since World War II. Let's just put it that way.
I think
Pretty strange,
anti-communism
right?
was the supranational, ideology that stood against the one world state of communism, and then I think, but yeah, if you want, again, this is very speculative, but if you think that the one world state is a military power, it's a financial economic power, it is somehow an ideological power, there still is a natural way where if things go wrong in the U.S., it would be the fulfillment of FDR's vision of the New Dealers running the world, and so the U.S. is ground zero of globalization, and it's ground zero of the resistance to bad globalization. We're both. That's why it matters so much. The president of the United States maybe is a catacon, maybe it's a type of antichrist, but presidential elections matter. They don't matter the president of Europe, and I think the intuition that they matter in the U.S. is correct. I'm not saying it will be the case for all time, but certainly second half of the 20th century and still today.
A couple of last questions here. Rene Girard, again in 2009, quote, "To make the revelation wholly good and not threatening at all, to eliminate this fear, this dread, humans have only to adopt the behavior recommended by Christ," close quote. Rene himself, as you know, ended his life as a very devout Catholic. Has this analysis had any effect on your own religious life, or is it in some way a kind of cop-out to say, oh, no, all we need to do is all practice personal holiness as best we can?
Girard always said, you just need to go to church.
Right.
And I try to go to church. And
Rene would be very,
I'd like to know what church that is.
and then somewhere Rene is pleased.
And then at the same time, I also think that there is some part of it that is political or social or something like that, and maybe it's always a way in which I'm not as much of a saint as I should be, but I keep thinking we have to also try. I want to always try some of both,
right?
Both the personal and the political. I think Mother Teresa was a greater saint than Constantine, but there's still a part of me that has a preference for the Christianity of Constantine. We still need.
Mother Teresa was greater than Constantine? Come on, man.
Something like that.
All right. Revelation is a very frightening book, in my judgment, in any event. We've got plagues and beasts and the end of the world. But at the very beginning, I went back to prepare for all of this. I went back and looked at Revelation again. At the very beginning of the vision that St. John describes in the book of Revelation, here's what we get. "Then I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me, and on turning I saw one like a son of man. His voice was like the sound of rushing water, and his face shone like the sun. When I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. But he laid his right hand upon me, saying, 'Fear not. Fear not. I died, and behold, I am alive.'" Close quote. So what are we to do with this fear not? You've mentioned this a number of times, this notion. It's always the problem in trying to understand history. What's going to happen no matter what we do, and what scope is there for personal action? Fear not is an injunction in the book of Revelation from Christ himself. So Christians are meant to take it very seriously. But you could easily take it as a kind of, oh, it'll all work out. There's nothing I need to do. There's nothing any of us need to do. It's out of our hands. It'll all work out. What do you do with fear not?
Well, this is sort of starting to get way, way, way above my theological pay grade. But I think it means something. I think God will work it all out, no matter how bad the choices are we make. And so, in some sense, in the end, God will work it out. And then at the same time, I'm not sure that we should always be looking at it from God's point of view, and from a human point of view.
Human agency
it surely matters a lot.
All right, last question. Let me quote you one final time. Quote, "Maybe people think about this stuff a lot more than they let on." Close quote. So what do you have to say to some bright 20-something who does think about this stuff? What should some young American read? What should he or she do? What advice about how to lead a good life when we think we may be in the end times? What advice do you have for a young Peter Thiel?
I'm always so bad in this department, but
stumble through it.
I think, if it's too high a lift to go to church or something like that, I would say that it's important to try to find a way to integrate your life, we're just fragmented in all these different ways, and to integrate the knowledge, to connect, what we think is going on in your life with history, with our society. We need to somehow not have this postmodern MTV-like incoherence, and there's some way that asking these questions is a way to try to, we need somewhat more integration. We need to somehow pull things back together. It's what the universities were supposed to do. Don't think they will do it, but you have to figure.
After years of deconstruction, you're calling for an active reconstruction.
Yeah, it may not happen in the progressive cult that is the university, but still, there's it is really a time for reconstruction.
Peter Thiel, thank you. For Uncommon Knowledge, the Who.
Okay, so that looks like that's going to do it in regards to our video analysis of Peter Thiel. And what did we see? I do appreciate the conversation that he's putting forth regards biblical scripture and modern technology, biblical prophecies, but his worldview is not Christian. It's inherently not Christian. We see a sort of Hegelian worship of innovation and historical progress, though he isn't a progressive in the sort of American leftist political meaning, although I think you could make somewhat of a case he is, even in his libertarian framework. We see a Christianity that really isn't, it's kind of divorced from a focus on repentance. We didn't hear repentance once. We didn't hear a reorientation of the heart once. We didn't hear a mention of the heart at all. The only time we heard a mentioning of the church was Rene Girard's advice that as we approach the end times and these conversations should be more prominent, and people are going to kind of shy away from it because of the reality of the potential coming of the apocalypse, that people need to go to church. And I think that's clear, but then it comes to what church, what type of Christianity, what type of faith, what type of theology, what paradigm are we looking at this thing from? And so from an Orthodox perspective, we can see there's things that we would agree with. The one that I took that I liked the most out of that hour-and-a-half conversation is that Christianity views the masses as madness, and Enlightenment rationalism believes in the wisdom of the masses. And if we look at an eschatological timeline, this is true, because the masses are the ones that are going to bow down and worship the Antichrist. And that was kind of the one takeaway from Peter Thiel that I thought, okay, well, that seems biblical. That comports with my own Orthodox faith. That seems real, because of the masses is a sort of amalgamation of individual personhood, which were made in the image of God in, towards a sort of collective hive mind, which ultimately is the transhumanist movement. That's ultimately being, hooked up through Musk's Neuralink to the AI God that they're going to venerate. But what we saw was that Peter Thiel really, he doesn't have a total Christian paradigm in which he understands that these things are ultimately inevitable. History does have an end. We can't just navigate what he referred to as a narrow path, not the narrow path of Christ. Because remember, the word virtue wasn't mentioned once in that hour-and-a-half conversation regarding Armageddon, Antichrist, biblical prophecy. That we're going to innovate ourselves around the catastrophe of Armageddon and the rise of the Antichrist. That's not what? No, not at all. And so he still, in regards to a more general understanding of progressive, he is a progressive. He is a sort of Hegelian progressive in the sense that he believes in this historical progress of innovation and this sort of fulfillment that's occurring, but it's not inherently Christian. And I do appreciate him pushing back on the transhumanist utopian dreams, that he kind of pushes back on the fallacious idea of a sentient AI God. I do also believe that the AI can't be sentient. Peter Thiel has questioned that. But at the same time, living an openly and proud homosexual life while claiming to, be a voice of Christian reason within Silicon Valley, I mean, is that the best that Silicon Valley has to offer in regards to some sort of a Christian perspective on the technologies that we're being faced with right now? And that we do, I know some people question the existence of atomic energy and atomic weapons. I do think they're real. So I definitely don't believe the moon landing. I do think nukes are real. And we live in a time which the forces of evil are the West. I mean, when we look at the Ukraine-Russia fiasco, it's the West that's encroaching on Russia. It's the West that is violating their word. It's the West that is threatening and violent in its behavior. When we look at the Middle East, it's the West and Israel that is the spawn of many of the problems that we're witnessing. When we look at radical Islam, it's the West and Israel that's funding and creating many of these groups. This is evil. And so is the United States going to be the catacon with holding the absolutely not. Unless somehow by God's providence, the American people that are still virtuous and moral and have an orientation towards God somehow get a hold of the levers of power. But, I don't think any of us should put any hope in the U.S. government, especially anybody elected, be it Donald Trump or whoever. They're not our saviors. And if things continue on the path that they are, very much like the one book that he mentioned that was written at the beginning of the 21st century is whether or not we're going to be able to see the end of the century. And he gave it a 50-50 shot. And based on the way that we're going right now, I mean, it's hard to negate that. It's hard to argue with that. The U.S. is Israel's greatest enabler. That's a fact. It's just a fact. Anybody who denies that just isn't paying attention enough. And so, what we saw, and same thing with Musk is I don't know the heart of these people. I think Thiel is a little bit more reasonable than Elon Musk. I mean, his gaslighting and his saying one thing and then doing the opposite is so explicit. And it's just so sad that the critical mind of the average person has been so numb that they can't even see that Musk is, somebody to not be trusted whatsoever. Not whatsoever. And should you trust Peter Thiel? Absolutely not. As I said, Palantir is a corporation that he runs that, is aiding and abetting the intelligence agencies that at some degree he says are threatening to us. So, all that's to say, as we read the eschatological perspectives of the saints and the elders, the next stream that we're going to be doing is on elders on the end time, this Romanian text, talking about prophecy, talking about the second coming of Christ. We'll see that the church is the one that really provides a vision. If you were a non-Orthodox person, you listen to Peter Thiel, I'm not sure how exactly that conversation is going to bring you closer to Christ. I'm not sure how that conversation is really going to get you to reorient your life. It's really about thinking hard. We got to think about these questions. We got to ask the difficult questions. Well, let's ask the difficult questions. And, but the only way that we actually change history, the only way that we actually orient is by good people doing good things in the world. So when we read the Orthodox text, they're much more explicit on what we need to watch out for, in regards to signs of the Antichrist, things to look out for. I mean, Peter Thiel's great insight is that the Antichrist is going to scare people and offer them safety and peace. Okay. The world's going to be in chaos and people are going to be yearning for somebody to offer safety and peace. And then a one world government that he himself isn't totally against. Right? He's in favor of what he calls good globalization. Well, what's good globalization? Good globalization for Peter Thiel is asking critical questions about globalization. What? No, we need national states that recognize the dignity of people and the peoples that come from those places. And when we look at the mass migration, when we look at the economic undercutting of people and nation states, when we look at the bringing in these H-1B visas and high skilled labor, which really isn't high skilled, Valuetainment had to bring in somebody to have a $41,000 salary. You had to give somebody an H-1B visa to do a $41,000 salary. That's not high-skilled labor. What are you talking about? And all this movement, all this greed, it's the sin that is the catalyst towards our movement, towards this Armageddon, towards the Antichrist. And we didn't get that from Peter Thiel. We barely a recommendation for people to go to church. And if they don't want to go to church, his thing was to integrate your life. Basically, acquire a historical perspective, which is good. I've been very vocal about that. We need to acquire a historical perspective, especially the younger generation. It's astounding, absolutely astounding to ask the average millennial or Gen Z or anything about history. They don't know anything about it. And if we don't know history, we have amnesia because it is us. We are the human species. It is our ancestors, our blood, our people that are transgressing the historical timeline. And we have an obligation to know about them. And it's through that historical perspective where now I think the church and the traditions and the faith begins to acquire a significance that outside of historical framework you don't get. So I do appreciate that, but saying if going to church is too high of a bar, just integrate your worldview and apply your domains of information into different areas and insights. I mean, okay, but that's not going to stop. That's not going to stop the Antichrist. That's not going to stop the degradation of the world around us that is at high speed. And so I say all this. I don't want anybody to leave feeling down and out, because Christ wins in the end. We all win in the end as long as we are willing to reorient ourselves, repent, confess, and then commune back with the Godhead. So that is the hope. That is the promise. That is something to look forward to. And I do believe that to some degree. Now, I'm not Joel Osteen here. I'm not telling you to be your best self and that if you do good, God will do good to you. That's not what I'm saying. But to some degree, as long as we're faithful, God will protect us. And we just recently celebrated, I forget how many weeks ago that was, but the three holy youths and Daniel that were in the fire but weren't burned by it. God protected them due to their faith. And I think that's the opportunity here. That's the way in which we actually find deeper meaning in our lives. That's the way we become more integrated into the historical reality of creation, which is tied back to the Creator. It's by that communion with the Godhead that we then are historically connected with a phenomenon, and we are God's soldiers. We are God's warriors in the world. And I think that for young men, that's the ultimate meaning. And telling people just to integrate your knowledge in the domains of your insight, that's not going to do it. That's not going to do it. So, just got a couple super chats here. Bredimus 118 throws in $10. Thank you so much, Bredimus. He says, God bless. Thank you very much. God bless you and yours. And Happy New Year's to everybody out there. Smash that like. Hope you guys have a wonderful New Year's Eve and New Year's. First Person Q gifted 1 COTEL Crew membership. Thank you so much, First Person Q. Really appreciate that, my brother. God bless you. Happy New Year's to you as well. And John Anon throws in $5. Shout out to John Anon. He says, thank you, DPH, for shining the light of orthodoxy as the only true hope in this fallen world. Amen. And thanks also for sharing the AmericanOrthodoxFilm.com project in your recent stream on North American Saints. Well, thank you, John Anon, for sponsoring that. Really do appreciate it. And Jay Hamza throws in a generous $20 and says he stands on nothing, preaching to us how to keep our house in order while he is not in order. If he himself doesn't know what we want, how can he tell us what we should want? I award him no points, and may God have mercy on his soul. Well, I do agree. I think, we don't know the sincerity of Peter Thiel's heart. Maybe deep down he's really sincere and maybe he struggles with his sexual orientation. But as I played the video from when he was at the RNC, he's very proud about it. Although he sued Gawker into oblivion for outing him as a homosexual. So it didn't seem like he was too proud about it then. And that would insinuate to me that his vendetta against Gawker for outing him as a homosexual insinuates to me that deep down he is actually not okay with it. Because why else would a homosexual billionaire not? Why would he care if people knew he was gay or not, especially in today's social climate? I mean, it's totally acceptable. Nobody's even going to criticize you for it. So I think to some degree, deep down, I think Peter Thiel is disturbed by his own sexual fetish. But I think we should pray for him and pray for Elon Musk, even though, you know, that guy kind of gets under my skin, along with Jordan Peterson recently, just really gets under my skin. But anyways, thank you very much. First person Q. And MyTech23 throws in $5, says, Happy New Year, the Chinese year of the snake. And the Chinese year of the snake is my year in the Chinese zodiac. Now, I'm not promoting zodiac here. We're not astrologers. But within the Chinese calendar, I am a snake. So this is supposed to be, God willing, a good year for me. So God willing, that will be the case. But Happy New Year's to all you guys and to your families. You know, I think what me and my wife are going to do tomorrow is she is really adamant that we're not going to go to any nice, you know, parties or dance events for New Year's. I think what we're going to do is kind of keep it pretty low key, stay at home. And she wants to kind of write out our goals for each other, for ourselves, our spiritual goals for the year of 2025, so that we have a clear vision as we head into what, by all intents and purposes, will be a very tumultuous year with a lot of things around the corner. So who knows what's going to happen? As I mentioned, sounds like the same doctors on CNN, the same people, you know, Peter, what is it? Peter Hotep. I forget what his name is. Already warning us about an H1N1 virus, and that we have all the inoculations, all the jabs are ready to go, guys. Sounds like that something's going to be released. Something's going to happen. God willing, it doesn't, but it certainly seems to be the case. And let me just check. Streamlabs doesn't look like anything's on Streamlabs. So I think that's going to do it, guys. God bless you. Thank you, MyTech. Happy New Year's to you all. And again, I'll be back Wednesday or Thursday, potentially January 1st or 2nd. And we're going to be reading some of the Elders on the End Times, this Romanian text, newly translated into English. Again, you can buy your copy if this is something you'd be interested in. Buy your copy over at the Eschaton Vigil. You just go to Eschaton Vigil store. Let me pull this up here. Bam. Bam. Here we go. So the Eschaton Vigil shop. We got the Russia Before the Second Coming. We got the Eschatological Vision of the Blessed, and this one's Elders on the End Times. We have a handful of more texts that are going to be coming, but get yours. Use promo code COTEL, COTEL. You'll get $5 off. And again, just help us at the Eschaton Vigil, trying to translate the wisdom of the saints in what appears to be certainly a day closer towards the end of the world than yesterday. But God willing, it's not for a while. God willing, our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren will live in a better world that we exist in today. But that's on us. So anyways, guys, Happy New Year's. God bless you all. And if you're old calendar, blessed nativity to you still, because I know some of our Orthodox brothers are still on the nativity fast leading up to the incarnation of our God, our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. So if you're on the old calendar, blessed nativity to you. Happy New Year's to everybody. And I'll see you in the next one. As always, until then, God bless.